All right, good morning, Mr. Tan Kiat Hao, Minister of State for Prime Minister's Office and Ministry of National Development, leaders of the built environment, distinguished guests, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural BuildSG Lead Summit 2021. Yes, thank you. It's a long time since I hear some applause physically in person from everyone. And it's nice to hear this. Maybe let's have another round of applause. Let's keep everyone awake, keep the hype going while the times are hard. And today we have about 250 participants on site and about 1,000 online with us to discuss emerging built environment issues and trends to build collective stewardship amongst fellow built environment leaders for the advancement of the sector. And a very warm welcome to all of you here. One, a round of applause, please. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I hope all of you are awake also. All right, maybe I just want to share a little bit on our LEAD framework. Our LEAD framework was developed in partnership with the BE sector to build leadership capacity at 3 levels: industry, firms, and at the individual level. Programs under the framework is anchored by 3 key developmental platforms, namely the Horizon Program for the emerging leaders and the Milestone Program for senior leaders. And this is complemented by a series of broader programs such as today's pinnacle event, the LEAD Summit, the BuildSG LEAD Forum, and the Distinguished Conversations series to mentor, nurture, and engage committed and forward-thinking leaders for our sector. Now, we are also pleased to share that leaders have undergone and benefited from 2 runs each of Horizon and Milestone programs, representing the full industry value chain from developers, consultants, builders, specialist contractors, to facility management firms. And more than 1,000 industry leaders have also participated in the various LEAD programs. Next, I'm also pleased to share today's program for this morning. We will commence the summit with the opening address by our guest of honor, Mr. Tan, and this will be followed by a sharing on the BCA Industry Work Plan 2021, which touches on new policy directions and the strategic focus for the year. This will lead to our first plenary session, where our distinguished panel members will focus on opportunities for growth and creating a competitive edge in the built environment. The second session of the summit will look at the challenges and opportunities in building strategic business alliances. And this session will focus on how to tap on the ecosystem advantage by shaping a new culture of collaboration. And with that, I hope everyone is looking forward with an enriching and insightful morning. So to commence today's event, it is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Tan Kiat Hao, Minister of State for Prime Minister's Office and Ministry of National Development, to deliver the opening address. MOS, please.
A very good morning to all of you. Very nice to see all of you in person. My colleagues were sharing me that a lot of people are very excited to come to today's summit, because first time we can get to see each other, although in different segments, but get a chance to meet each other and say hello after a long time. So very happy to be here. Firstly, very good morning to Mr. Lim Sim Seng, Chairman of the Building and Construction Authority, who's joining us online. Very good morning. Mr. Kelvin Wong, CEO of the Building and Construction Authority, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and many familiar faces and friends. I'm very happy to join you for the first BuildSG Leadership Engagement and Development Summit, or LEAD for short. BCA launched the LEAD Summit framework in 2019 to nurture a group of committed and progressive industry leaders. To date, 55 young leaders and 45 senior leaders have participated in the LEAD, Horizon, and Milestone program, respectively. For example, Mr. Mohammed Nasri, who's a graduate from the first batch of the Horizon program is a civil and structural engineer with WSP. Through the Horizon program, he had the opportunity to interact with other young leaders from various other disciplines at different points of the value chain. Post-program, he now leads the design team in advanced engineering studies of several transport projects such as Jurong Regional Line and the Cross Island Line. So I encourage all of you to nominate your young emerging leaders for the Lead Horizon program to groom the next generation of innovative leaders who will transform the sector. Today's summit brings together over 1,200 leaders from across the built environment ecosystem to discuss the next wave of transformation and our role in driving and developing the built environment business ecosystem. These are very timely and important topics, especially as the built environment sector continues to grapple with the challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. But even before the pandemic, Singapore was already facing various challenges as a nation. First, we have seen significant structural shifts in our external environment, which have impacted our operating context in Singapore. The global economic outlook remains uncertain, given the recurring waves and mutations of the COVID-19 infections in many countries, as well as the escalating geopolitical tensions between major powers. In addition, shifts in global supply chains have further exacerbated by the increase in protectionist policies. This has major implications on a small and an open economy like Singapore, as our success has been built on openness with the rest of the world. Next, our demographics are changing. Our population is aging. About 14% of Singapore's population is aged 65 years and above. By 2030, this will grow to 25% of our population. Coupled with the falling birth rates, there will be serious implications if we do not adapt our society and economy to these important changes. We also at the same time recognize the changing aspirations and concerns of young Singaporeans. The types of jobs that youth today aspire to are very different from the past, very different from my generation and many of you sitting here. A job is more than just a means of putting food on the table and ensuring a roof over one's head. Thus, there's urgent need for us to ensure that our youth have sufficient opportunities to take on good jobs which are attractive and meaningful to them. And finally, climate change remains an existential threat for all of us. A small, low-lying island city-state, Singapore is extremely vulnerable to the impact of climate change. That is why Prime Minister Lee spoke about the importance to understand, mitigate, and adapt to climate change at the 2019 National Day rally. As we do so, there will inevitably be costs and trade-offs. For example, there may be changes in the cost of production or in delivering a service. Businesses and the rest of us will have to re-engineer our processes, and individuals will have to change their habits. But where there are challenges, there are opportunities. For example, technology and digitalization can help to boost productivity. They also present opportunities for us to redesign jobs and workplaces to attract younger workers and to retain our older workers. Sustainability can also be a new engine of growth and jobs for Singapore. A report by Bain & Company in November last year estimates that a green economy can potentially create up to $1 trillion in annual economic benefits for Southeast Asia. These can provide new growth opportunities for our companies. I've spoken about some of the broad challenges and opportunities that apply to us at the national level, but these are so relevant and important trends, opportunities, and challenges for us in the built environment sector. And we have been working with all of you for many years to address them. COVID-19 has further laid bare some of the fundamental issues facing the sector. In particular, the issue of reliance on foreign manpower. This was the case even before COVID-19, but is now an urgent need for us to ramp up our efforts to tackle it at this point in time. In the past, we had construction workers from multiple countries. Today, many of our workers, especially our general labor workers, come from India and Bangladesh. The latest travel ban on foreign workers from India has revealed how vulnerable our construction sector is on foreign workers, especially from certain sources or countries. The recent infections in the worker dormitories have also caused uncertainty and anxiety. And the Ministry of Health has also further shared more details on some reinfection cases yesterday. The government is committed to partner and work with the sector to tide through this latest disruption together. We have announced several support measures. First, to help ease the manpower crunch. BCA and MOM will temporarily allow new construction workers from China to enter Singapore to work first and obtain their skills certification locally thereafter. This will allow firms to continue bringing in Chinese workers even though some Chinese overseas training centers have halted operations due to COVID-19. And this change was due to feedback from many of you from the industry who shared these challenges with us. Second, contractors working on eligible public sector construction projects will be given an additional 49 days in extension of time, or EOT, for a period from 7 August to 31st December. Together with the earlier 122 days of EOT provided, contractors working on these public sector projects would have been provided with at least 6 months of EOT in total. These will give contractors more time to complete their projects. And I hope private sector developers and projects will also take guidance and alignment with the public sector. Third, again, in feedback from many of you in the industry, we have simplified the claims process for the ongoing cost sharing of non-manpower related qualifying costs for ongoing public sector construction projects that are under $100 million in contract value. Contractors will receive a 0.1% payout of the contract sum for every month of delay automatically. Contractors will not be required to put up detailed substantiation to receive this payout. And this is really in response to feedback from many of you. So, together with the industry partners, the government will continue to work on even more support measures and step up vigilance in the construction sector to get through this crisis together. At the same time, I'm so very glad to know that some firms are taking the lead to help the sector. For example, some developers had given its contractors an extension of time beyond what is mandated for ongoing project completion, as well as advance payments and increase the frequency of progress payments to aid cash flow. Some micro builders in the Micro Builders Association Singapore have also banded together to do manpower pooling. These are important, encouraging moves that the industry is doing together with the government. But if the fundamentals of the built environment sector do not change eventually, it will not be sustainable in the long run. If we continue to be locked into manpower-intensive construction methods, we will never break out of the cycle of requiring more and more low-cost and increasingly lower-skilled workers coming to Singapore. Eventually, even these workers will have opportunities in their home countries as these countries develop. Many of you know that even with competitive wages, it is increasingly difficult to attract skilled workers to come and work in Singapore from countries such as China. Thus, we must build greater resilience in our built environment sector, particularly in reducing our reliance on migrant workers and moving away from manpower-intensive construction methods. Let us seize this window of opportunity to transform and turn our challenges into opportunities. To this end, we earlier announced various moves to give the industry a stronger push towards undertaking decisive and long-term transformation in the areas of productivity, digitalization, and sustainability. COVID-19 reinforced the need to adopt design for manufacturing assembly, or DFMA, on a wider scale to reduce our reliance on manpower and foreign labor. As announced, we will raise the minimum buildability score for large commercial, institutional, and industrial developments with GFA of at least 25,000 square meters next year, starting from April 2022. This will support our efforts to make DFMA the default method of building for all large projects. Next, integrated digital delivery, or IDD, can facilitate better collaboration amongst project parties across the entire building life cycle. During this pandemic, we have seen how digitalization has minimized disruptions to work as physical contacts need to be reduced. Project parties were able to continue collaborating on projects with their stakeholders virtually, and like how we are doing so today. Beyond enhancing resilience, the digitalization of the construction process will also lead to increased productivity and facilitate wider adoption of DFMA technologies. Lastly, to tackle the longer-term challenge of climate change, we are pursuing more ambitious sustainability standards for our buildings. We've launched the 4th edition of the Singapore Green Building Master Plan, which is part of the Singapore Green Plan 2030. Jointly created by industry stakeholders and the community, the Master Plan captures our collective commitment to pursue more ambitious sustainability standards. This will hasten Singapore's transition to a sustainable, low-carbon built environment. We've increased adoption of DFMA, IDD, and green building technologies. The jobs of the future will be very different from those of the past, even those currently available today. We will create new and higher skilled jobs with better working environment that will attract local PMETs and more tech-savvy Singaporeans to join the built environment sector. We'll continue to train our existing workforce to upgrade their skills and take on new roles through training initiatives such as a professional conversion program for built environment-related job roles. I hope many of you will avail yourself to those training schemes and programs. Lastly, I want to just thank all of you for the strong partnership between the industry and government. We held many engagements with industry partners to resolve problems together and step up measures to make sure our sector stays COVID safe. We hope to continue working with all of you and our community in this next leg of our transformation journey. The Alliance for Actions, or AFAs, launched by the Emerging Stronger Task Force last year, have allowed us to partner the government and together with industry to ideate and implement solutions together. I want to cite one good example. The Digitalizing Built Environment AFA aims to bring on board 300 leading firms in the industry to adopt digital platforms for their businesses based on a Common Data Environment Standard, or CDE. And this will facilitate integration and collaboration across the entire built environment value chain. I will also hope to work together with all of you to grow our talent pipeline in the built environment sector. To date, we have partnered the industry to provide more than 3,600 scholarships and sponsorships under the BuildSG Scholarship and Sponsorship Program. BCA is also working with the trade associations and chambers to develop new and review existing accreditation schemes to align with the progression pathways and skill requirements for job roles identified under the skills framework. So with alignment in vision and commitment among all of you, leaders of the industry, let us collectively accelerate the transformation of our sector. Leaders can also play a crucial role in building collective stewardship and developing networks for stronger collaborations to uplift firms across the value chain together. And I hope that all of you can continue to tap on incentive schemes under the BuildSG Transformation Fund to support your transformation effort. One important aspect of this transformation at the heart of all the things we do is people. Our workforce, our employees, ourselves, our staff. And I appeal to all of you here today also to take the lead in enhancing your HR practices. firms should provide good career progression and competitive remuneration packages to attract and retain Singaporeans in our sector. Please leverage the skills framework for the built environment sector for our various accreditation schemes to invest in your staff development and training to deepen their capabilities. And finally, the built environment sector is a value chain. We are all in this together. And for a chain to be resilient, we need to ensure that every link is strong. And we will continue to work with you through this current COVID-19 crisis, but I also call on you as leaders to step up to help each other and for bigger firms to support the smaller firms during these very challenging times. In conclusion, COVID-19 has provided a very strong impetus for us to re-examine the way we build. Even as we work closely with our firms to overcome these near-term challenges, let us not lose sight of the need to continue pushing forward in our transformation effort. And I look forward, together with my colleagues, to strengthen our partnership with all of you as industry leaders on this journey. Together, let us uplift the built environment sector holistically. And I wish you a fruitful summit, and hopefully you have time to catch up with old friends and partners today. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, MOS Tan, for the inspiring and also very encouraging opening address. Next, I would like to invite our first speaker today, Mr. Kelvin Wong, Chief Executive Officer of the Building Construction Authority, to deliver his presentation on the BCA Industry Work Plan 2021. CEO, please.
Can you guys hear me? First of all, morning everybody. Morning Minister of State, Kiat Hao. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you joining us today. Also understand from the team that this is the very first time we are combining both the Leadership Summit as well as the work plan session. So as I've kind of, after working for a while, you find myself being a nag. So, as I always tell my team that we want to do this and make sure that this is meaningful to you. So please give us a feedback at the end of today's session and let us know what is working and what is not so meaningful. I was just counting the number of months I've been on the job, about 6 months, and there are many reflections. But I think one of the things I just want to bring up is that actually, if you look in the audience and the people and the friends that we have joining us online, actually we do really have a very strong industry, a very strong community, a strong community. When I reflect about all the other industries that I've been involved before, you don't find that many local companies or strong Singapore-based companies in any one particular sector. And actually, if you think about it, actually we do have quite a lot of you guys in this industry. And what's more, there's tremendous amount of passion and perseverance in this industry, a lot of passion. And I think I also see that passion in my team in BCA as well. So I think, we do have a lot to leverage. And I think we really want to see how we can work with everybody to capitalize on what we already have to really drive the industry forward. Okay, so this is the part in terms of me sharing what BCA wants to focus on and how we are thinking about the industry, how we would like to take the industry moving forward. So we've been discussing this internally quite a bit, and we ask ourselves, what is that future built environment industry that we want in Singapore? So how do we think about it? One easy way is to ask ourselves, how do we have a built environment in Singapore, not the industry, but a built environment in Singapore that is ready for the future? We have many key trends coming up. We have aging infrastructure, we have climate change. All this demand us to think about what kind of built environment do we need in Singapore. And if we have a definition of that, then what kind of built environment sector or industry do we need in Singapore in order to build that future? And then what does it take of us as leaders or as organizations? What do we need to be ready to forge that kind of industry, to build that kind of future? So, so this is how we are asking ourselves. And I appreciate that, for some of us caught up in all the mini crises that we are dealing with right now, it's sometimes a little bit hard to cast that kind of thought. Together with you guys, we've been working closely with you guys for the last, 15 months or so, hunkered down in the trenches, really trying to fight all the fires. And just over the last 2 weekends, we've been responding to the NCR of India. So I appreciate that, in the midst of all these mini crises, it's like, it's really sometimes quite challenging to think about this. But I would say that from my perspective, from BCA's perspective, we have to. And in many ways, there are already many telltale signs that we are dealing with that really demands us to respond differently. So to me, it is not incoherent in terms of how we need to think about this and the crisis and the mini crises that we have to deal with right now. Just so that, just to share with you some trivia that we have in terms of the discussion within BCA team. But we've refrained from putting on the slides because we don't want you to fall off the chair. But some of the things that we think about is, what kind of headlines do we want Singapore built environment to be known for by the year 2030? 2030 may be too soon, but say 2050, right? So what would some of the headlines be? So, hold on to your chair, but for example, would it be Singapore built by robots? Or Singapore, the most resilient city in the world in terms of built environment? Or Singapore, the most sustainable built environment city in the world? So these are some of the things that we do want to think about, and we have to ask ourselves, to get there, what do we have to do from now to then? Again, this slide just points out what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that, the current context that we have. Many of these are very obvious to us, in terms of strengths. Actually, we have a very strong reputation, right? Talking to one of our friends just now, just before this, it's like many other countries want a part of Singapore in them. So in terms of, we do have a certain strong branding that allow us to export. For many efforts of the industry and BCA in the past, we have been, and also collaboration with SGBC, we have been able to establish a certain reputation and strength in the whole area of green, sustainable buildings. And actually, many of you guys are regional or even global champions. In terms of weaknesses, we do have a very, it's the same for any businesses in Singapore. We have a very small domestic market. So it is not the platform that we can completely rely on. And because of the limited exports, actually the industry today has relatively low margins, right? And as we all know, we have a heavy reliance on unskilled foreign labor. And the industry, while all of you are still very, very young and, good leaders, but we all acknowledge that the industry as a whole faces challenges in terms of attracting younger people. But I think there are also other things that I feel are there, are signals and trends that are hitting us, and whether we can, whether we would leave money on the table or whether we are ignoring the science. So for example, we all talk about rapid urbanization in Asia. So this speaks to a lot of opportunities for us, a lot of business opportunities for us in the region. But it's not so easy to export the whole contracting kind of services. So what do we have to do to have something that the regional cities want of us that they cannot replicate locally yet? At the same time, the rise of urbanization will also mean that there will be a rise of larger customers in the region, as well as larger competitors in the region if they are not already in the landscape. There's also a growing demand for sustainable projects, and there's also this whole wave of digitalization. And the other ones in terms of threats, climate change, right? Aging population, reducing workforce, aging infrastructure, spoiling concrete, And some of these regional disruptions that we get every now and then, whether it's sand or PVC and now currently foreign labor. All these are things that are hitting us already right now. And I think I was just sharing with Moss just now, Minister of State Kiat Hao just now, that if we can find a way to find ourselves to be more resilient, to be more ready for the next round of disruption, I think we will be able to grow stronger and stronger. But if every time we get hit, we have to go back in the trenches, and I think we'll all be very, very tired. Okay, so beyond the SWOT, there are other three key themes that I think is of increasing importance, some of which overlaps with what I've just shared just now. The whole idea of resilience. And like I said, it's not just about sand, not just about PVC. It's also about manpower right now, exactly right now. And the whole sustainability, not just in terms of energy efficiency, but also in terms of how we source and where we source from, both materials as well as labor, and as well as energy. And like I mentioned, how can we harness digitalization and technology? So in the sharing later, in the subsequent sharing, I think we just break it into three parts. The first part is about how we are recovering from this pandemic. The second one is about how we intend to work with you guys to transform the industry. And the last one is about how we hope that we can support you in harnessing technology and innovation. Okay, so I think we all know, the whole of 2020 that we went through. 2020 only means one thing, COVID, to most of us. But we went through a lot. First of all, we had to deal with the whole circuit breaker thing when almost everything came to a standstill. And then there was that whole issue about having to quarantine workers because of C+ cases. And then because of all the safe management measures that we have to put on ground, everybody is having to deal with a lower capacity and productivity. And then because of border restrictions, now we are having to deal with this whole labor shortage and looking for new sources of workers. But also during this period, what we saw that actually progressive companies that have embarked on the new capabilities before the crisis started were actually progressing. They were less affected. Everybody is affected, but the ones that were more progressive in taking on new capabilities, what we are hearing is that their projects have actually progressed faster than the rest. So whether it's the PVC or whether is it firms that have actually much better and stronger HR practices. And actually we have put in place a whole series of measures and continue to respond, all thanks to the feedback that you guys have been giving us, to see how we can continue to support the industry to pick up our feet and start running again. So there was a massive effort at the national level in terms of coming in to support the manpower costs through job support scheme, as well as a worker levy. And then we also put in place a 1.36 billion package that actually, apart from subsidizing some of the costs in RRT, safe management offices, there was also a package to help companies embark on some of the tools to make sure that their sites are COVID safe. We also put in place a COPMA Act, whereby under that we provided temporary relief in terms of the legal enforcement actions, and also have extension of time, universal extension of time, and the prolongation cost sharing provision in there. And like what Minister of State just mentioned, we've just announced a simplified processing of prolongation cost sharing for all the public sector projects, and also for the public sector projects, additional extension of 49 days. And then in terms of the manpower situation, like what we announced a few days ago, I lost track of time, we have now relaxed the so-called entry criteria for the workers from China. And hopefully that will allow companies to actually pull in more workers from that market. And really all thanks to the patience, the perseverance, the collaboration from all friends and partners in the industry, I think we survived, right? Many of our projects are now back on. It's not hunky-dory yet, we're not out of the woods, but I think we have found a way to work very closely as a team to respond to all these unexpected changes. And in terms of number of C+ cases, it's actually brought down to a very, very low level. Yep, so I think that was a reminder that please encourage all your workers to go for vaccination. I'm going for my second one this Saturday. Okay, but I think the thing about this whole pandemic is what has changed. In many other industries, they joke about, or they talk about how COVID has accelerated digitization of many of the businesses much faster than we have been able to in the last 10 years. I think somewhat similar for the built environment industry. But what else has changed for us? And I don't think it is a transitional thing. In many ways, I think they are really very strong signals about what we need to do differently. First, we talk about, I kind of alluded to just now, which I think will always be a key theme for us. How can we be resilient against the future diseases? Sure, we can always put in more safe management measures, but maybe the root of the problem is for us to actually have less unskilled foreign labor. Today, we are hovering around 230,000 foreign workers in Singapore for the construction and marine and process industry only. We used to be at about 280,000. Based on the current construction output that we are having right now, the number of, if you do a proportionate ratio, the number of unskilled foreign labor that we have in Singapore for the CMP sector should be around 250,000. So we are short. But regardless of whether it's 230,000 or 250,000, it's still a very big number. So no matter how we try to house them, it's very hard for us to imagine that that will be pandemic ready in terms of any new forms of pandemic. So, and we ask ourselves, if we were to compare ourselves with the other more developed sector the markets in Japan or in Australia, where everybody knows how they have been for a while, how can we move in that direction? The other one is in terms of contracting. How do we change the way we contract so that we can share the risk? Because right now, there are a lot of comments about how contractors are unable to bid because they don't know how to price the risk. And actually, the market is shifting very quickly, right? I was just telling my colleagues yesterday that the negotiation power is shifting towards the companies that have access to manpower. And for whatever reasons, if that guy is very good in sourcing cheaper costs, actually suddenly he has a much more competitive operating cost. So the landscape is changing very quickly. So how can we as an industry, between the contractors and developers and the consultants, come together and cost share some of this risk separately instead of into the main body of the contract, so that we can share both the upside and downside? And how can we redesign the jobs to be more attractive? So I know that some of us, when we talk about sourcing for unskilled foreign labor, we're hoping that the situation in some of the countries will go back to normal, and then the tap will reopen again. And maybe there are also other sources that could be a bit similar. But if we believe the trend, the urbanization is happening, that all other Asian cities are also similarly developing, then actually it's a matter of time that some of these supplies of unskilled foreign labor will actually be severely curtailed. So we already have a situation right now, and I really want to see how we can work with the industry to redesign our jobs, to retool the way we construct, so that we can actually be more resilient against some of these trends. So that is about us emerging from the pandemic and how we ought to keep an eye on what has changed and how can we respond better. The next segment is about how we want to work with you to transform the industry. And I kind of mentioned about this, and one of the key areas that I just want to touch on is really point to about how we do want to work with you, work with many of the developers and the government procurement entities to really identify the skill sets and capabilities that are in demand overseas, so that we can have more focused effort to work with the industry to develop these capabilities that are exportable. Many of the initiatives that we've been pursuing are still very important. So the green building space, like what Minister of State have mentioned, we've just announced the new Green Building Master Plan, the 80-80-80, and I think so it's still an important space. In the whole DFMA route, the design for manufacturing assembly, we will be actually strengthening our buildability score, and hopefully we are able to work with you to adopt some of these more buildable practices. And in terms of IDD, like what Minister of State mentioned, through the Alliance for Action, we have now onboarded many more companies, many more developers to actually bring the contractors on board of this digital delivery journey. So all these remain very, very important. And back in the 2019 COS, we have also announced our intention to actually stop NYE sometime this year or next year. And we are also reviewing how we are reviewing the DRC, the foreign worker dependency ratio ceiling, to see how we can encourage the industry to move towards more lean methods. So if that's not a hint strong enough, please take note of that. But I think really I talk about how we want to transform the industry. So we do want to focus on how we can work with the industry to make sense of, to make sure that the business model works. That is still, we are able to work with you to generate the profits, as well as to keep an eye on the capabilities that means growth for you. So the way we are thinking about it is that, we have very strong government procurement agencies, right? That conducts many key projects, whether is it the JTCs, the MOH, the LTA, the PUBs, the HDBs. Many of these government entities actually work on projects that actually help to hone very unique capabilities or give the industry interesting track record, whether it's hospitals, airports, tunnels. And we will be, we have, with the strong support of many of my colleagues from the other step boards, we are now, rejuvenating our effort to actually have more dialogues with the industry, with progressive contractors, right? To help them understand what capabilities what are the capabilities that we need the contractors to focus on so that they can do better in the future contracts. Okay, so these are the conversations that we are hoping to hone, that we're hoping to provide feedback on, and BCA separately will be looking at how we can work with the contractors that have stand up to say that this is the commitment and the plans that the contractors have for themselves, and we want to work with the contractors to invest in those capabilities so that we are better positioned to take on those projects. And like I said, hopefully with a mind of being able to export that service. Separately, we have also announced through the recent budget that we are embarking on an alliance approach to help pull along the industry value chain. Because oftentimes when we speak to the contractors or the subcontractors, the feedback is that the margins is very low and we don't really have visibility beyond this current project about what else you can leverage on to transform. So we've decided that we're going to work with the entire value chain at the same time. But that means being able to identify industry partners who share the same vision as us. Industry partners who share the same vision between yourselves, and collectively, outside of any one particular project site, collectively, we agree that this is the direction that we move ahead, and collectively, these are the resources that we'll set aside to move together in that same direction. So we are hoping that through this alliance approach, we can demonstrate what is possible. Because many a times in our own little, in our own corner, in dealing with our own challenges, we oftentimes look at it and say, this is not possible. Okay, so the idea of this alliance approach is that by identifying the progress, the firms that shares the same vision as us, and also with the progressive developers, we're hoping that with this group we can help demonstrate what is possible. Okay, and hopefully that will help point the way forward. So beyond our assistance with the larger companies, we are also enhancing and extending the schemes that we have to support all the other firms. So we continue to have the Construction Productivity and Capability Fund that will actually support many of our firms in their productivity efforts. And the Productivity Innovation Project scheme has been enhanced or maintained at 80% co-funding support level. There's also the Productivity Solutions grants that has been there and also extended to help our SMEs in embarking on some of the BIM tools, and some of the automation tools, right? So for example, things like the Autodesk BIM 360 is a pre-qualified tool that firms large or small can leverage on PSG to adopt these tools. But I think beyond this, we are also transforming the regulations in terms of how we regulate. As you know, the CORNET 2 is going to be launched towards the end of this year. But already we have started developing CORNET X. Because working closely in the industry, the team led by Chi Leong, we know that we really need to get to the CORNET X kind of format whereby it's truly collaboration across all the agencies, so that in terms of when the industry uses it, it's more coherent, there's less so-called regulatory hurdles that are sometimes in tension with one another. So we want to hopefully get to the CORNET X version sometime in 2023 and 2023, such that it's to the industry is more usable, not just in terms of IT, but in terms of clearing all the regulations on the part of the agencies. We are also looking at how we can put in place smart approvals and smart inspections. So the use of more data analytics and the use of more technologies like drones, so that, to again back to you, that hopefully the experience to you will be an easier one, a smoother one. We will have to disrupt your sites less, because we will have more access to data and we will be able to use things like drones. The drones are also used for, obviously, the established buildings to deal with facade issues and things like that. And I think moving forward, the consumer, the homeowners are increasingly more demanding in terms of the quality of products that they're having. So we are also reviewing how we can strengthen our quality systems. First and foremost, we will actually make sure that homeowners and home buyers will be more informed about the quality systems that we have. We will also be reviewing and making our Conquest or QM system a bit more robust, so that it is a system that works better for us, for us together as an industry. Finally, this is the final section. A lot of what we talked about just now has a lot of technology and innovation element. But I think, this phrase that one of the industry friends has kind of shared with us, which really stuck, was how do we harness the diversity of responses from the entire industry? How do we create an environment that will make it more conducive for innovations and new ideas to take place? How do we create an environment where we have more access to technology? And COVID is not just the only trend that we're dealing with. Like I mentioned just now, you have climate change, you have aging workforce, and you have digitalization. And there are many, in the last couple of months, I've actually had the privilege of actually seeing some of these interesting startups. There was one that is talking about they treat the water in a construction site before discharge, electric way rather than a chemical way. There's another one that instead of using diesel engine power for your sites, is using a battery system. And then obviously there's one that's been out there for quite a while, VR Collab, that has been kind of the 3D tool to help developers and contractors look at projects. And also, actually, in the last couple of months, working and visiting many of our contractor friends, actually been also very encouraged by how many contractors, many leaders have actually been looking at some of the more innovative methods to build, whether it's ultra high performance concrete, or whether it's, I'm not civil engineering, so I'm already using all the wrong words, all the structural systems that we're importing from overseas. But I think one of the things that we have picked up is that, so far, it has been a little bit more costly for firms to deal with it on your own, whether is it to investigate what are some of the new requirements in order for you to bring it to Singapore, or some of the new methods, what are some of the issues that we care more about here in Singapore that we have to deal with. So I think BCA moving forward will be working a lot more closely with you. We want to work more closely with you to see how we can support you in actually identifying the pipeline of things that the innovation things, the new things that you want to bring to Singapore, and how we can help you to investigate those areas. And at the same time, like I mentioned, with all the startups, how can we work with you to create an environment to say that, hey, look, Singapore, BCA, yourselves, we are open for business, people with new ideas and new technologies, please come and show us what you have. A lot of the efforts have actually been, a lot of the basic building blocks have actually been put in place. If our friends can recall, so I'm not speaking in sequence already, this is the last part, losing the alignment. If you remember, we have the BEM, the Accelerator Market Program. And actually last year or the year before, we launched the beta program, the Built Environment Technology Alliance. Many of these tools are there in an effort to see how we can help the industry really harness innovation. We will be bringing all this effort together. We will be focusing on whether we can work with you to identify the key problem statement, okay, the really meaty ones, the really challenging ones, and focus all our resources in these key problem statements, whether is it the problem statements from the GPEs, or from the key developers, or the key contractors, main contractors. What are the key problems? And then with the key problem statements, we can then harness whether it's existing technology resources or actually harnessing the innovation and ideas from the startups. So we want to strengthen this nexus between ourselves and the technology so-called sources. So this is the end of what I have to share. But like I mentioned, we really want to see how we can work closely with you to really reinvent the entire industry. So thank you for your attention. Thank you.
All right, thank you, CEO, for sharing with us our strategic directions. And I like the last tagline that says, we can be the future. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to our first plenary session for today. And the theme for this plenary session is leading the next wave of transformation in the built environment sector. The session will be moderated by Professor Neo Boon Siong, former Dean of the NTU Business School. And our panel of distinguished panelists joining CEO on stage are CEOs and key senior leaders of their organizations. So may I invite on stage Mr. Wong Hien Fine, Group Chief Executive Officer of Sabana Jurong. There's a round of applause. Mr. Manohar Kiantani, Senior Executive Director at CapitaLand Group. Mr. Mukund Sridhar, Partner, McKinsey & Company, Singapore. All right, gentlemen, please. Prof. Neo, if you are ready, the time is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Is mic working? Okay, great. Good morning. Thank you very much for being with us this morning, and we have heard from Kevin. I think a very exciting journey in terms of where the BE sector can continue to develop and transform for the future. The panel this morning, we are going to really follow up on many of the themes that Kevin has spoken about in terms of how, as BE leaders, we should be taking the initiative, being the example to lead this next wave of transformation for the future. So for my panelists, I'm going to get you to start by perhaps elaborating or highlighting some of the key challenges that may either accelerate or impede this transformation and how the sector can create value. Now I'm going to ask perhaps Hian Fai to start since we just heard from Kevin. So I'm going to get Kevin to go last.
Give him a rest.
Give him a rest, yeah. Hian Fai and then Manohar and then Mukund, please.
Sure, thanks, Prof. I guess for all of us in this BE sector, it's not really the first time that we are talking about transformation. Yeah. As far back as in 1980s, I remember we spoke about all this. All the issues that we are confronting today are not new to us. Yeah. And having been a developer, yeah, and a consultant and a contractor, I must start off with a positive note. That all of us in this room and those dialing in has done a tremendous work. Yeah, our BE sector today ranks high internationally. Last Friday I was on a call with the governor of Kazakhstan because we were looking at how we can help them to develop, and his words were there. We wanted Sabana Jurong because you have helped Singapore transform. Yeah, from a third world, to a first world. Yeah. So I think we can all be very proud. Yeah. But fundamentally, I guess we do have challenges in the industry. Today, developers, I guess, are now seen as bloodsuckers. And when they can see the light in the tunnel, they are now faced with more cooling measures coming. Yeah. For consultants, we have to cope with often a very expanded scope without being paid, and also have to carry the heavy responsibilities. Yeah. And contractors often work at low margins. Yeah. And they have to find ways to make money, from the contracts. And worse is having to chase for the payment. So fundamentally, the built environment has many challenges. If you look at our push towards adoption of new technology like digitalization, DFMA, you can see why it's taking so slow. Yeah. And more importantly, I think the big questions before us, and this is a very worrying trend, is that young graduates are shying away from our sectors. Yeah. And without the necessary skill set and the talent coming into the industry, it is very difficult for us to push the industry into new areas. So we really need to address some of these fundamental challenges as we go ahead. Every year, I guess all of us in this room, as leaders of the BE environment, are challenged. Because all our folks deserve their pay rise and their bonuses, but unfortunately the sector doesn't pay very well. Yeah, so we are very pushed to do a lot of things. Yeah? And I guess this is one of the fundamental things that we all have to sit down and discuss. And I urge all the BE leaders, to come together and look for solutions. Yeah, because if we don't, we're not going to grow from here. So to me, I think the challenges are quite difficult, but I guess as a nation, we have been proven to be resilient enough to find the solutions, going forward. Yeah. So that's my take on the challenges and transformation.
Do you want to mention maybe one possibility we can do together to make that happen, or to find a solution, or to create value?
In our journey to grow at Sabana Jurong, I think our focus is really to do POC projects in Singapore and then bring it overseas. Singapore is a small market. I think Kelvin and the ministers have said that. But out there, people really appreciate what we do. So there is tremendous future for us in the overseas market. And of course, in Asia Pacific today, it's the fastest growing region in the world. And we in Singapore can take really good advantage of the opportunities being offered. Yeah. I mean, yesterday I met with an Indonesian. He has an island, and he says, I welcome you all to come and do work for us in terms of food resilience projects. They are keen to learn from us in terms of how we manage smart cities and so on. So tremendous opportunity for us. Yeah. So don't just look at the Singapore market. Yeah. That's my advice. Look at building your core strength in Singapore, and then going into the region, because really we can bring back a lot of benefits from that.
Thank you very much, Hian Fai. Manohar?
Yeah, thanks. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Prof, maybe you just bring your speaker a bit higher. Yang Fine was clearer than you. Okay. I couldn't understand you. Okay. So I think, first, I fully agree with Yang Fine that we have made tremendous progress in this area. And just listening to Minister's speech and Kelvin's presentation was actually very inspiring on the kind of things. And I've been following all the calls for collaboration that we have done in terms of digitalization and all just over the last 1.5 years. I must say it's really very impressive. Let me break down into the short-term challenges and then the opportunities first. And I think I think everybody is familiar with it. But the reality is that instigated by COVID, the BE industry is really facing once-in-a-lifetime challenges. So our team, as developers, we are faced with all the issues that the contractors are facing. I must say BCA has been very supportive. I think they have just been thrown into the deep end of the pool, and you really got to just respond to the totally unpredictable challenges. So I think given this, I think they have done a great job because we have worked very closely with them on solving many of these issues. And even as we address these problems, I do want to recommend two things that we can do better. One is the way the government agencies work together. I know in Singapore we are better than the rest of the world, but we always want to set higher standards. And if we can use this COVID opportunity to further improve the way we manage our regulations and give approvals, fast track approvals, not on in a consequential manner, but in a combined manner, just like we are doing part TOP. I think that would be very powerful. Then at least this crisis would have enabled us to take one leap forward. I'm going to sit on the BCA board. I think I'm already a board member, so I will talk a little bit on behalf of that without having got the briefing yet. If that BCA is that champion agency, then it must have also some of the authority to pull these things together. And I think whether it's LTA approvals, SCDF approvals for fire protection, I think we know that safety can never be compromised. That's a given, right? But within this, I think there's a tremendous possibility for us to differentiate ourselves. Because like everything in life, there's a circle of concern and there's a circle of influence, right? So for the concern, we can address partly, but what is within our influence, we can really push the envelope. So I would request that, as in addition to all the things mentioned, that maybe we can push the envelope on that a little bit further. The second thing, of course, what we are concerned about is because of the tremendous challenges faced by the industry, whether there will be companies that will survive or not. But I do think, and I think that was mentioned in some of the comments made also, our industry is rather fragmented. We were having a pre-discussion on our table, and one of our colleagues there just gave some statistics that on $1 million worth of contracts, how many contractors do we have? So in Singapore, it's manifold more than in Japan or elsewhere in the developed countries. So I do think there is a way, where we must, see how the industry can be less fragmented so that we can have the best possible outcomes given our limited resources here in Singapore. Now, whether it's through alliances or whatever, I think those are the kind of things that we need to work on. And I think, Kelvin also alluded to it in his messages that, it makes sense to adopt a key account approach in managing the industry, because I don't think it will be possible for us to help everyone. As difficult as it sounds, it is just the reality. So we will need to make some of those decisions. And I think we as CapitaLand, as one of the major private sector developers, would want to identify partners that we can work closely with, and then together we can help one another. But it will be much easier, if we have a pool of identified partners and then focus on them. So I think those are the challenges, and I think the opportunities are tremendous. Digitalization, we have used BEAM and other digitized solutions in many of our projects, and I think the outcomes have been very positive. The critical advantage of using BEAM, collaboration, I think it forces people to work together right from the start, so coordination becomes much better. Visualization, so you have very little rework, right? The third thing is, of course, operations. So we are trying to develop, digital twins for our operations. And there, of course, one of the key issues is availability of good manpower, people who can really exploit BEAM to the fullest. I think BEAM is like a Ferrari, but we are driving it at 50 kilometers an hour. I mean, that's the reality. But at least the positive thing is that, previously BEAM used to be a 4-letter word. Now at least it's become a 3-letter word, right? So people do see the benefits of it. And I think there's tremendous potential if we can address some of these things. I will pause here. There are a few other points on sustainability and productivity, but let me pause here so that, we can bring our friend here into the discussion as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Manohar. Mukund?
Thank you. I think I'd like to echo my fellow panelists. COVID-19 has been an ambush for all of us. And as most of us know, you can only take cover for so long. You won't survive the ambush if you don't fight your way out of it. And I think BCA and government have done a fantastic job of really battling it together with the industry and fighting our way out of this pandemic. Now, as McKinsey, we've had the privilege and benefit of looking at the built environment sector from two places. One is, the dance floor, in the trenches with our clients, working on growth, productivity, operational improvements, digitization, but also a little bit from the balcony, where we have observed the industry at large. And, we've published a lot of research. We've gone deep into what really drives performance and health of the built environment. Now, performance, as you know, our view is driven by market structure as well as the conduct of the players, which ultimately leads to performance. And our view is, in terms of the challenges, this is structurally quite a challenged industry, right? We may take some credence to the fact that this is not just a Singapore problem. This is a persistent, hard global problem, and no one's really cracked the code, right? If you look at productivity, for example, which is an outcome, it's a marker of performance, global construction productivity has stagnated. If you compare this with manufacturing, manufacturing has really galloped away, right? So what really drives structure? And we all know this from working with contractors, working with developers. The market is super fragmented. There is an inability to invest, which therefore drives the conduct. So people are not really prepared to invest for the long term. It's very hard to see the benefits. Business cases that take 7, 8 years to materialize don't make sense when a project is 3 years long. And everyone talks and lives and breathes projects. That's the lifeblood of the industry, right? So it is important to transform the project. At the same time, it's also important to transform the structure, the relationship between owners, developers, and contractors. All over the world, it continues to be adversarial, right? It continues to be counterproductive. So what really is the new compact? I think, Kelvin, you mentioned this in terms of a new contract. I think that's one idea really, really worth developing, because that strikes the heart of the structure of the industry, right? Then we can see how it makes changes to player conduct, how people behave, how do they invest, what kind of projects do they bid for, right? What kind of technologies do they buy into, and what kind of productivity enhancing measures and initiatives they really roll out. And then, you have health, and health for us takes two parts. You have the health of the industry itself, and I think, and Fine mentioned this, it's super hard to attract Gen Z and millennials into this sector. As it is, talent in the sector has been on a decline. We're not getting the best quality engineers. Before, we were losing them to professional services, then to finance, and now we're losing it to IT and technology and startups. So that is a hard problem as well. And the second thing on health is, global health, which is sustainability. I mean, if you look at it by various measures, the built environment is either the second or the third biggest emitter of carbon, right? And has been for a long time. And it's very hard to see how this is going to change in the pathway to get to 1.5 degrees, right? So lots of persistent hard problems. We are not alone. It's a global challenge. But I think Singapore has the benefit of having the platform, progressive thinking, an enlightened regulator and government to make a few big changes. And the opportunities are there on accelerating digitization, on really being a lighthouse for sustainability around the world, and also exporting this innovation. I think someone mentioned it. They talked about what is the Singapore strategy, right? We have to export our innovation to the regional markets and beyond, and that's the only way for us to really grow and expand, given the small fragmented market we are. So let me pause here. Lots of ideas that we can discuss probably in the next section, but just wanted to frame it in the context of both in the trenches as well as looking at it from a macro view.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Mukund. Kevin, back to you. If you have any other comments or pick up any of the themes that have been mentioned.
I think, thanks I really agree with all the fellow panelists. As everybody was speaking, I think that the thing that we really want to be able to do is really to see how we can work with the industry partners to really, identify the growth for us, because, and to demonstrate that growth is possible, and that we all have a different future that we can look forward to. Yeah. So that's the belief that I think we really want to have a chance to work with. The word that comes to mind is Spartans, right?
Yeah.
We need to identify the Spartans among us and fight for the future.
Okay. One of the issues that I think a couple of you have mentioned, and also we discussed that at our table, is a whole fragmentation of the industry players. Small, focus on survival, and I think one of you mentioned no time and no ability to think about the future, right? When you're thinking of how to survive the next year. And therefore, all this digitalization, investments in new technology are just not even in their frame of mind. And therefore unwilling to develop new capabilities as well. How do we address that? How can we change that? I think Kevin talks about alliances. That seems to be a logical way to approach it. But again, many of our companies in the sector, the leaders want control. They want to be their own boss. They want to make all the decisions. and therefore kind of are reluctant to really go further beyond that. How do we make this happen? Let me open it to any one of you who wants to share your thoughts.
Well, I think, Prof, one of the key ingredients, in our industry is really to create the chemistry between the various disciplines and between the various teams. Yeah, I often say that a small problem can become quite big and impossible to solve, and big problems can be quite small depending on the the team spirit and the chemistry that's been developed along the way. So this idea of alliances, unfortunately, in our industry, will probably mean that certain groups or groups of companies that have worked well together be promoted, as a colony, yeah, and working at projects and then taking it overseas, yeah. We must deviate from the thinking that to back certain groups of companies, yeah, because if you don't get that chemistry right, you're then not able to sit around and collaborate and think of new ideas and create value out of the projects that we have been working on. Yeah. So I would say, creating that chemistry and that team spirit among the various companies is really paramount. And then you will be able to find that, you create a winning team combination that can survive and thrive in any of the countries that we operate. So in the past, we have avoided backing teams, yeah, or groups of companies. I think we should reconsider that, and we should really push companies to work together closely. I mean, we talk about early contractors' involvement, and it's not just from the design; it's really all the way, yeah, right from project inception. I think Manohar, in CapitaLand, I think the formula, it's really strong formula of building a strong, cohesive ecosystem, yeah, whether it's consultants, contractors, and suppliers in all the markets that they operate. So I would like to urge companies to come together and create that winning formula.
Young Fine. Okay, firstly, I think we know that the industry has many layers of contractors. So I think the one that is probably easier to solve is the first batch of subcontractors. So a developer will work with that first tier subcontractors, right? And then of course it becomes subcontractors of subcontractors of subcontractors. And personally, I think that our big problem with having so many subcontractors is because it is so difficult to deal with foreign worker labor issues. That's why everybody rather subcontract out that part. So that's where Singapore is different from other countries, right? So that's one of the reasons. In my view, I don't have any empirical evidence to show that, but I think that's one of the reasons why we have got so many tiers of subcontractors, because people don't want to deal with those issues. Okay, so that's something that's unique Singapore. But I think we do have to identify, and Minister mentioned this, right, in a way that the strength of a chain is determined by its weakest member, right? So we can talk a lot about DFMA, and I think that's the way to go, and the progress is very impressive. But we have to recognize that for DFMA to work, everyone along the value chain has to be able to deliver the solutions, right? DFMA requires the subcontractors to have the skill to assemble the things together properly, otherwise it becomes a problem. So actually there's no cost saving in DFMA as of today, right? In fact, it's more expensive. And where alignment and all don't work out, the rework is very painful, right? So while it's a good thing to do, we must recognize that even as we set these ambitious and correct targets, that everyone across the value chain comes along, right? Otherwise, there'll be a very big mismatch between what we say that we can do and what is actually happening on the ground. And I would say DFMA makes a lot of sense for large-scale projects, residential, where everything is very similar. But if you look for commercial buildings, which are very specialized, and especially DFMA in the MEP area, is actually very challenging, right? So we need to have a realistic roadmap. and also bring along those contractors who are able to invest in this so that we have the capabilities across the value chain and there's no mismatch. Otherwise, I think we will reach a certain level and then plateau off. So if we want to hit, what was your target, Kevin? 70%, is it? Or what? If you really want to hit this, right, then we really need to make those important decisions and get everybody on board, right? And I think to your question on how do we work with the contractors so that they invest in technology, I think there'll be a natural process. I think today's push towards digitalization, and if in Singapore we make that decision that we want less reliance on foreign workers, you either come along or you have to get off, right? And I think that's the reason why we need to make certain hard choices and see who are the people who are willing to, embark on this journey.
I think I'd like to go back. It's a very pertinent problem you've raised. So going back to what transformation means, it's a big word, right? So at McKinsey, at least we like to think about transformation as what is the least count of transformation? What needs to transform in part for the whole to be transformed? And I want to go back to my earlier point that this is an industry and a sector of projects. So you want to transform the industry, the least count of transformation is the project, right? And therefore alliances make sense, because then you can start and follow a project from inception all the way to closure. And each of these projects will demonstrate the picture of success to the industry, right? They can show what great looks like. At this point, you're looking at some presentations here, you're looking at some stories there. It's hard to see the glory of this in its entirety. So when people see the picture of success and demonstrated value, then it becomes very real, that I want to be like that, right? And then you're setting the standard and inspiring, the next generation of projects and cohorts of companies. And in the process of transforming a project, the alliance will transform everyone that's involved in the project. Be it the consultant, the engineering consultant, it could be construction companies, main cons, subcons, tradesmen, and of course, going into asset management, if you look at AM, FM, and PM, right? So when you have these success stories, pictures of successes of projects, then it's very possible to scale and multiply it across the entire industry. And you could also then solve the talent problem simultaneously by getting a talented cohort of engineers who can then spread the word across other projects.
As many of you all know, both Mano and myself, we came from, spent many years in EDB. Actually, the whole notion of involving suppliers in developing the next generation product is actually entirely very mature practice in many other industries. So in the aero engine space, it's a very common thing where contractors and suppliers are actually onboarded to do a risk sharing, RRSP, I can't remember what RSP, risk sharing program, before they get the contract to build the engines. But they come on board to share the risk of developing this next generation engine. And when it works, then this same people that have actually collaborated then becomes the kind of the short list of contractors to bid for those projects. And I always tell my team, right, to build engines is a large thing, this is a small thing, but to build the next generation iPhone, to build a masterpiece, you don't just go to the next cheapest supplier. You do work with that contractor, the supplier that you have worked with for a long time to improve the quality over time and make this even a better product. So I think that is the kind of arrangement and relationship that we want to forge with the industry. And I think it's very, very possible.
So I want to just add to what Kelvin says. I think we need to sit down and look at the entire value chain and making sure that the entire value chain has enough economic value in it, so that at each of the value chain stakeholders, they are properly rewarded. So developers need to make the money. Consultants need to get properly paid. Contractors need to have enough margin to invest in automation and higher value workers and get it in. So if you don't look at the entire value chain, it is very hard to move one part of the value chain up the ladder and expect the others to follow. So in my view, some sort of a holistic view of the entire value chain is really necessary.
So this is where I'll do a little bit of a preview. And this is where the BCA, the Growth and Transformation Program will come in. I mean, first of all, we need to be able to hopefully convince and inspire partners and industry friends to really say that, hey, look, you guys are coming together to really invest in that future. But where there are, where we are able to identify where we can help, this is where the Growth and Transformation Program that we're putting together right now, we will hope to help the alliances with additional resources so that we can actually, bridge the gap between projects, to be able to sustain the kind of development on a multi-year basis.
So, just to add, one of the most successful programs we had in EDB in the mid-80s was this program called the Local Industry Upgrading Program, LUP, and where, because we were getting a lot of the MNCs to come here, we needed to accelerate the development of the subcontractors. So MNC would then adopt, let's say, 5 or 6 of their main contractors, and then the government would actively support this to grow those identified subcontractors so that the whole cluster or the whole, today we don't call it cluster, today we call it ecosystem works, right? So I think one way is to see, if let's say the main contractors, for example, right, can identify their critical subcontractors and then work specifically with them to do these, to make these changes, and then give, instead of giving very broad-based support, give targeted support to these companies. And then I think as a secondary outcome would be all the other things that we talked about. Lesser fragmentation, more investment in manpower, in technology, and so on.
I think absolutely. The new program is a very good example. If you just leave it on its own, given the industry structure, Mukund, that you talk about, it will not happen. So the lead firms, the bigger firms, would have to take a holistic view of the entire value chain and put together and provide the leadership to kind of get the group to come together. Either you do that, or as almost as Sabana Jurong is doing, you build an vertically integrated firm where you have everything in-house. But that has its benefit, but also has its downside. And in many cases, also has problems. But we can't run away from that. The relationship, the trust, and going beyond just looking at short-term benefits to build capability, not just as a firm, but as a set of partners or as an alliance for the long term. Mukund, you wanted to add something to it?
Just give an example or an analog. Every time I speak to construction industry colleagues about learning from automotive or aerospace, they say that's manufacturing. We are different, right? They don't do foundation, they don't do formwork. So, but there's lots to learn. If you really think about CAD, CAM, if you think about the early generations of BIM, digital twins, they all came from aerospace, right? Now, in a way, they're also in the projects business. It's just that they have moved from the field to the factory, right? And they have a different methodology of actually and of delivering their projects. Now, if you see the analogs, their projects are actually building, same with automotive, it's building out platforms. They take about a decade to build out, but then you're assured of business for the next 2 decades, right? Now, our contractor friends are unfortunately in the position where you're not assured of work for the next 18 months, right? In that mind space, I completely empathize with the inability to think of investing in technology or in automation, right? Or in talent. It's super hard to do that. So, if we were to take this analog from that space, there's also a mismatch in the investment period and the returns, right? In the time scale of projects and the business case return for the investment. So I think there is definitely a space here, an opportunity for a keystone player. It could be the government, it could be large developers, can be, that can be formulated to really say what is our next, 737, right? That's going to feed an entire generation of contractors, upgrade their productivity, or what's the next, Tesla platform, right? Where an entire generation of contractors are going to be upgraded.
just to share with everybody a kind of early preview of what we are thinking about. I mean, in the whole built environment, actually there are a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of large structures that's just almost close to impossible to automate. Right? I was just visiting one of Lang's MRT station. I was like, wow, okay, the diaphragm wall, okay, so there's a lot of areas for us to really take turns, but there are also just as many low-hanging fruits. But we recognize that to the industry, to each individual company, it may be a little bit, the hurdle to cross may be a little bit high. So I think we are doing multiple things. We have identified certain segments whereby it's a common problem to everybody. I've also put in some of our friends from the manufacturing automation houses to help us take a look at this and see how we can tackle some of these automation problems. And we won't do it on our own, because if we just take this journey with the automation houses, we'll probably end up with something that's not usable by you. But we will have to involve many of you guys to really make sure that the R&D that we're going to get these automation houses to work on will be something that's applicable. So instead of tackling some of this automation, say for example in the fit-out yards, it's something that we are also pushing. But at the same time, we are also looking at how we can encourage some of the equipment vendors to actually provide more, to make sure that they are able to avail their technical service support to the industry more readily. So we are looking at how we can encourage many of these these equipment vendors, whether it's the automated painting robots and things like that, to make their technical service more available, so that many more of the so-called mid to small size contractors can actually avail themselves to some of these solutions. So it's not all just the complex ones. It's a whole value chain, from the very complex problems to the simple ones.
Thank you very much. I think we have a very useful discussion. Perhaps let me switch to a different topic. One of the things that Kevin talks about is the opportunity because of the urbanization that's happening in Asia, particularly among the major cities. And given Singapore's stage of development, it's a natural model. And therefore our firm becomes the players that can help speed up that urbanization, not just in terms of building, but with quality. That again has not happened as quickly as we would like. And really with Sabana and CapitaLand, you guys are the leaders in this field, and you probably have some success in that. How can we speed that up for the industry?
Okay.
You want to have a go first?
Okay. I think we have to distinguish between consultants, architects, service providers, and developers and contractors. A bit tongue-in-cheek, I would say that service providers, consultants, and all that are the fathers. Developers and contractors are the mothers, because they just go in once and then come out and get their fees got. We are stuck there, no? We are stuck with a baby, So that's why, as a developer and a contractor, you have to determine very clearly where you want to go. I think don't even think of going international or going into a country unless you are really convinced that you can be there for the long term and provide a differentiating advantage. In fact, I think it is very dangerous to ask companies to go international before they are ready. But I think for consultants, for service providers, no question. You are like a butterfly. You can go everywhere, pollinate, fly off, right? We are, as a developer and a contractor, you are stuck there, right? Because when we go in, we are talking about minimum hundreds of millions, if not billions of investment. If you cannot have scale, you cannot have differentiation, it's not going to make sense. So for a company like CapitaLand, while we are in 30 countries, we only do greenfield development projects in 4 countries: Singapore, China, India, and Vietnam. In the others, we have small projects elsewhere in Malaysia and Indonesia, but those we don't see as strategic markets to do end-to-end projects. Because as I said, you need scale, you need to understand the local environment, because let's not forget, just because there's a push to go out, because Singapore is a small market, does not change the fact that normally development and contracting is quite a local business. Having said that, of course, the big Chinese contractors and all are coming here. So there's opportunity, but you have to be prepared for this, right? So I think in our case, we also look at the field that we have. So we think that, in the case of India, we identified opportunities in IT parks, in business parks, and we knew that we could make a differentiating advantage, and therefore we have been reasonably successful. More recently, we have gone into logistics and data centers, but they're all very well thought through moves before you make it. In China, we have been, quite successful with our integrated developments, with the Raffle City product, also fairly successful in residential properties and also in business parks. In Vietnam, we are looking at residential mainly. So you really have to identify your playing field very carefully, right? Because otherwise you are going to have a very, difficult time. So I think we talk a lot about this smart city. So where we can really make a difference in going out to many countries is in our provision of services, consultancy and all that. Whereas when it comes to developers and contractors, I think we have to be more careful. Of course, in China, we are also involved in large-scale developments like Guangzhou Knowledge City, Tatansha, and all that. But it's only because we already have a sizable team there. You cannot have one man and a dog and hope to change the world. So I do want to caution on that. So even as we push for internationalization, we must make sure that we segregate different parts of the value chain.
Thank you. Kian Fai?
Yeah, I think just to add to Manohar, I think there are two things that we can do, to try and get ourselves out, into the export market. First, of course, is I think we should adopt a Queen Bee approach, where lead developers like CapitaLand can lead our Singaporean SMEs and all its value chain stakeholders and go for projects. Of course, in regions that the Queen Bee finds that they have a competitive advantage. So the first thing that we can do. Second thing we can do is really to try and export our Singapore standards. I think a lot of you know that even in Singapore, because we are a British colony before, we tend to look at British standards. The French and the Americans find it hard to compete in our market, even though they try and come in, but because we are so familiar with the standards, in Singapore, all our SMEs, whether they are contractors, suppliers, or service providers, are so competitive that they know how to operate within the Singapore standards. And one of the key things for our sector when you go overseas is that if you do not know the environment and particularly the standards that is required, you either don't win the project because you overprice yourself, or worse still, you underprice because you don't see the risk. So my view of it is that we can look at ways to try and export our Singapore standard. And here, I like to appeal to the Singapore developers. In all your projects overseas, let us adopt the Singapore standards and thereby, in a way, give our local SMEs an opportunity to really compete in the foreign market by tying up with local companies. So these are probably the two things that we can do to try and export ourselves.
It's a nuanced question. I completely agree with Manohar. We have to segment this and see what travels well and what travels easily, right? So ideas and services travel easily and they travel well, right? So of course, I think it's a no-regret move for Singapore to be exporting standards, consultancy services, concepts, etc. If you go a little further, you have development, and there, the world is replete with developers who have lost their shirts in foreign markets. So again, capital travels easily, but it doesn't necessarily travel well, right? So we need to be cautious, and like CapitaLand has done, you need to put a stake in the ground and say, this is going to be my second home, right, over the next 10, 15 years, and then you need to stay the course, right? Otherwise, it doesn't lead to a good outcome. And for construction, it's very different. If you see which contractors have traveled well and why, usually it's because there's oversupply at home, like as in the case of China, or it could be that capital is very cheap, like in the case of Japan, or there are distinctive capabilities or technologies you have, like the Europeans, which allows them to come in and be technically superior, right? Otherwise, you don't see construction industries really exporting.
Just to add to what Mukund says, recently we have an inquiry from India, and they were particularly keen to learn from us on our precast technology, because the requirements in India from the buyers now, especially in the residential sector, is higher quality. And a lot of our HDB precast thing, and they really want to learn from us. So I think the overseas markets are changing, and therefore whatever that we have learned in the past are quite applicable in some of these markets.
Just to add, I think for us, for anything to travel or to export well, we must be able to provide something that they need, and that we have that they do not have, that they cannot replicate. So to whether it's the precast, PVCs, or specific capabilities, and these are the areas that we want to, like what I shared just now. These are the areas that we'll be focusing our efforts on, so that we can build differentiating capabilities in Singapore.
I think my caution here will be that of course the Singapore name reputation gets you through the door, but just be sure you want to go through the door, okay? Because sometimes after you enter the door, you say, "What the hell? Why am I here?" Right? So I think our experience, we have worked with a few Singapore. Of course, we would love to work with Singapore contractors, but we just have to be realistic. We don't want to work with a Singapore contractor and then both of us die, right? So in India, we have had success with a company called L&W, which is a part of together with Wohab, and they went through a lot of trouble. So we went through all the trouble together, right? But even there, India is a continent in itself. Just because you are successful in the south doesn't mean you are successful in the north. And even within India, south contractors don't go to north and vice versa. Okay, even developers. So what I'm saying is that in a way we think of Singapore as a country, but actually it's just a state. It's just a city. So we need to be mindful. We need to do proper research, right? And even when it comes to precast, right? Because we are also, especially because of COVID, normally in India there's lots of labor, but because of COVID, the laborers went back to their hometowns, and that's why there's a new demand for pre-COVID. But you got to look at second, third order things, and that's why I said entry sometimes is easy. Our reputation, our name gets us in. And actually you realize maybe we are not ready to be in, right? So we have to do our homework properly, right?
Well, thank you very much for those comments. Yeah, we are small, we are a city state, but if you look at urbanization, that's where the priority of city development becomes critical. I wanted to kind of end this panel by coming back to the theme, which is really leading the next wave of transformation, whether it be dealing with the challenges that we have discussed about, the industry structure of fragmentation, or taking advantage of the opportunities that are there. They do not just happen. They require all of us as leaders to make certain choices, to change our policies or the way we run our organization to do it. So perhaps let me just go around all of you again to ask you to address, I guess, the third question that you were asking just now, right? How can Singapore-based BE leaders provide that kind of direction and leadership so that we really can become the model, not just in terms of where we want to be in Singapore, but also for the region in transforming the sector? Maybe let me start with Mukund, then we come back this way.
I think lots of good discussion. If we step back, there's only a few things that we can do, but with focus and with scale and intensity, right? I think on this whole thing about digitization, the concept of a lighthouse comes to mind. So the more lighthouse projects that Singapore has, and if McKinsey is partnered with World Economic Forum, where, for example, for Industry 4.0, you have lighthouse sites. What is a lighthouse site? It is a site where you've got tremendous value being unlocked, economic value, capabilities are built, so you've got 500, 600 people really trained up in a new way of working, and you're doing this sustainably and at scale, over a 1 or 2 year period, right? So but there are no lighthouses, for example, in the built environment, not in the construction sector, right? So can there be this concept of a lighthouse project or lighthouse segments? That's number one. I think the second one is, we've not spoken enough about the whole construction technology and for example, the prop tech ecosystem. Now, arguably, all the innovation is happening, for example, in the US or in other parts of the West. But just like Singapore and EDB have attracted fintech firms, have attracted startups in mobility, in all other parts of the industry, I think there is a case to be made for attracting them here, right? Even if it doesn't solve the problems of the industry, it will help in mitigating the problems of talent. Because if you can't attract them into foreman jobs, you can at least attract them into coding jobs for construction tech, right? So I think being a magnet for that is very important. And the third one is on sustainability, not to neglect. We have to recognize and be mindful of the fact that we are the second or third biggest emitter, and there is a social responsibility. Maybe what Singapore can consider is evolving some sort of a sustainability index or standard that's a beacon for the world and shows the pathway, right? How do you really mitigate carbon emissions at scale? Again, our innovation here can be in terms of thought leadership as opposed to investment of capital and so on. So just a few ideas, of the big things that we can do to drive and accelerate this.
Thank you, Mukund. Manohar?
Yeah, maybe I'll not give too airy-fairy a thing, but just 2 areas.
Yeah.
Minister talked about this common data environment. I think maybe that's one area we can look at. I'm an architect, but I'm a naval architect. So when I learned shipbuilding, actually you always start with a certain ship design, then you just change here, change there, finish. In construction, it always seems to be like we are reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
So actually I've never understood it. Why? Why can't you just take one blueprint, change here, change there, finish? Very fast, right? So if the common data environment helps us in that way, we can, and in a way it's a need, but if we can, show the way in that because of the unique constraints that we have, and I think we have talked enough of that, right? Modularize things, have building blocks, right? And through this data, I mean, I've not thought through the whole process, but you know what I mean, right? I mean, making use of data, modularize things so that even, sexy looking buildings can be built in a different kind of way, right? Start with a basic concept and then change it just like ships are built, right? So that's the one area I thought maybe, with all these changes we could work on. The other area that actually I'm quite passionate about is this low embedded carbon, right? As we say, concrete and, somebody also told me aluminium is actually the one with biggest carbon issues, right? So if we can make the application of low embedded carbon, because we have talked very little of sustainability, which is also a huge thing, right? Make it more available, make it somehow cheaper, give support for it. In EDB, for example, we have got this investment allowance scheme, right, where you get certain tax rebates for doing certain things to push this. I think if we also identify that as one of the areas to work on, I think that those will be probably more realistic kind of goals we can look at towards the next 3 to 5 years and make a difference there. And I think both of these could potentially be impactful. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Manohar. Hian Pai?
Well, I think, and Manohar touched a bit on it, this journey on transformation, as well as, moving into sustainability, it's really a long and, difficult process. Yeah. So I think as BE leaders in this room, we need to be committed and passionate in driving this. Because if we are not, like the Manohar say, you step to the door, you don't want to get involved, you know. So I think for all of us, it's a time for us to change. It's time for us to embrace digital technology and leverage on technology to do things better. Yeah. But really, as leaders, if we are not passionate and committed on it, I don't think we will succeed. So I think we need to stay the course and overcome some of these obstacles as we go along, because it's not going to be easy for the entire value chain.
I think, no coincidence, right? I mean, I think we've been, when you look at it, everybody agrees that actually the three main themes that I think we all agree on is digitalization, sustainability, and productivity and automation. So these are the three areas that I think, when we do our industry rounds, I think we all resonate around these three areas of work that we want to focus on. So I think I just want to count.
Very independently, just last week when I was talking to the team, you identified exactly these three.
Yeah,
the fourth one is manpower, right? Talent, skills, manpower, right? So 4 things, right? Yeah, so you are right, totally, these are the key things, right? Not rocket science, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think the priorities are clear, what needs to be done, but it's really the role of leaders to make it happen. So it's not just ideas, but I think I like what Hian Fine said in terms of his closing. The commitment, the passion, the leadership, the initiative that you need to take. And I think our panelists this morning has demonstrated that. We have gone off script for quite a bit. So they spoke not from their note, they spoke from their heart. They spoke from the experience that they have playing that leadership role in the firms and the industry for many years. So please join me to thank our panelists for the insights, for their generosity in sharing with us this morning. Thank you.
All right, thank you, moderator and panelists, for the robust and very insightful discussion. Yes, you may leave the stage now. Yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Oh, no. I think you have taken a while. All right, our second presentation will be delivered by Mr. Louis Lim, Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer at Keppel Land Limited. Now, his presentation will be titled Building a Sustainable Business Alliance, and this will evaluate the current industry context and industry transformation efforts with suggestions of mechanisms to enhance sustainable business alliances. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Lim on stage. Mr. Lim, please.
Mr. Tan Kiat Hao, Minister of State, Prime Minister's Office and Ministry of National Development, Mr. Lim Sim Sing, Chairman of BCA, and Mr. Kelvin Wong, CEO of BCA. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, good morning. I'm very glad to be here today at the BuildSG Lead Summit, which is a wonderful initiative to bring together various stakeholders in the built environment sector to facilitate collaborative engagement. Today, I will be sharing some perspectives on how industry players and the government might better collaborate and work effectively with one another to build sustainable business alliances. I will start with the industry context, some views on what industry transformation would require, challenges to collaboration, suggestions on possible policy incentives, and then I'll wrap up with a self-promoting case study for which I apologize for in advance. Now, to be very honest, as the morning unfolded, I was getting a little bit nervous because much of what I had planned to present had already been touched on by the speakers and the preceding panel. And I was like, oh no, how am I going to find my own thunder here? And so I tried to console myself. I said, you know, these are flashes of lightning, some insights, and hopefully what I hope to bring here is a framing of what the issues are and some thoughts on how we might take this forward as a sector. So please allow me to start with the current context of the built environment and what the structural, regulatory, and resource implications have been for collaboration. First, the industry structure has largely been based on a legacy of strict tendering and contracting processes. So as a result, competition, as you know it, as we've talked about, is rife. Industry players tend to guard information fiercely, and collaboration suffers as a consequence. While there have been recent moves towards price and quality tendering and early contractor involvement, price typically is still what matters most at the end of the day. So current contracting models are largely based on lump sum or fixed price methods, which cascades, as we've talked about this morning, risk down the value chain instead of kind of pulling innovation out of it. And so what happens after this is that this leads to unequal risk sharing and allocation, as well as significant risk undertaking by the smaller subcontractors and suppliers. Second, from a regulatory policy standpoint, I think Singapore, as we all know it, has a very robust regulatory environment and framework. And that sets to really safeguard all of us in the interest of all our stakeholders with very high standards set for safety and the environment and environmental protection as a whole. The government has been pushing for higher efficiency and productivity in the sector, and we look forward to more supporting policies to help industry players, especially the SMEs, to grow and to transform. For example, what we could do is to allow more flexibility in project completion timelines. We can start to remove some of the regulatory hurdles or reduce some of the penalties. And what this could lead to is greater innovation, creativity, and partnerships to pursue new ideas and construction methods. Third, as we've talked about, competition is very keen. In this market, there are limited resources when it comes to land, manpower, what have you. Right, the sector, as Manohar mentioned just now, has a large number of SME contractors. And actually the statistic, because we had to do some research on it, there are 117 subcontractors in Singapore for every 1 billion of construction output. 117. This compares to Canada, which has 39. And if you look at Japan, they have 14. Right, so that's the level of consolidation in those markets versus here in Singapore. And with the relatively small market size in Singapore, this further restricts the ability of our firms to grow. Right? So what happens as a consequence of this is that the level of trust within the industry and within industry players whittles away because everyone is kind of looking after their back. And this dampens the overall appetite for collaborative efforts. So let's talk a little bit about the industry transformation. So we see a few areas where there are opportunities for the industry to create breakthroughs. And as we've talked about, what we want to see is Singapore being positioned as a thought leader and a transformation champion in the built sector. First, technology adoption is extremely important. It's critical for the industry, which is still very much in a nascent stage of digitalization. Greater adoption of technology and integrated digital delivery, or IDD, as we've talked about, will enable us to gain greater control across the value chain. We can minimize downtime and abortive rework, as well as shift towards a more data-driven decision-making approach towards how we look at the built sector. Many firms are very reluctant to be first movers, not surprisingly. It is expensive, right? And as the technologies are new, they're still costly. And yet, ironically, we need more people to adopt these new tools so that we can get to the critical mass necessary to bring the cost down. And as the panel has shared, business alliances is something that we see as important and a possible route to help us to get to a better outcome by supporting this platform and these digital tools. And in so doing so, we can avoid the duplicity of efforts that is naturally going to happen if everyone's trying to do the same thing. And then we can implement these platforms which enhance collaboration and information sharing across both teams as well as projects. I think this leads nicely to the next point here on collaboration, I think which is core to what we're talking about, building sustainable business alliances. The ways of working amongst industry stakeholders will need to be transformed. We need to encourage greater use of collaborative efforts to improve project tendering, development, and delivery, both in terms of what we do here locally, as well as if we want to go overseas to pursue projects. For example, developers, consultants, and contractors who work much more closely together and openly together at the start of land tenders so that we can collaborate to put together more collaborative and competitive bids. And in so doing, we can also achieve faster delivery on the GLS sites. Now, collaboration is not just within the industry. I think we could also look at how we can extend this to other stakeholders within and outside the industry, such as financial institutions, REITs, and other real estate, as well as government agencies. For example, we can look at how local banks could, for example, adopt the BCA Green Mark as a criteria for a common benchmark they could put in place to enable green financing schemes. There are also other related industry stakeholders that we can put together to create unique value propositions through green leasing and green assets, and this also could help us to expand overseas. Now, the third point here I wanted to highlight is the need to improve on the built environment industry's employer branding. We talked about this before, how hard it is for us to attract talent, or how increasingly difficult it is. I think it's critical for us to think about what we need to do to draw the new talent in, the younger generation, creative minds, to pursue careers in the sector. I think this is a very necessary ingredient when we talk about sustainable business alliances. If we don't have the right people in the sector, it's not going to be sustainable. It certainly is not going to be successful. So I think there's a need to address certain preconceptions that we have, or that the public at large has, about working in the construction and the real estate industry. And we need, as a built environment sector, to think about how we can offer and demonstrate a variety of attractive career options as well as pathways. Okay, I think we've talked a little bit about the industry context and where we want to head to. I think this leads quite nicely to kind of distilling what the key challenges are that are really preventing companies from working more together and or with the government so that we can create a stronger built environment business ecosystem. Now, I think some of the things that I'm going to be talking about, processes, people, profit, should be quite apparent from the preceding sessions, as well as what we talked about in terms of the industry context, as well as transformation. Let me just summarize. I think first, the processes that are currently in place, that's one of the issues that we need to grapple with. Contracts are often delivered as design, bid, build, which defines the work into segments. But not all the trades may know how their job fits into the whole project. And without understanding the project's bigger vision, contractors usually have little motivation to do anything more than what's required of them or of you, and delivering only what is contracted as quickly as possible, right? I think there's room for clearer communication, as we talked about, across the value chain, and a wider adoption of technology, again, to enable efficient coordination and delivery processes. Second, we talked about the industry being perceived as dirty and dangerous. That needs to be changed to attract new, younger generation talents into the industry. And as mentioned before, upgrading of skill sets among the industry workforce is going to be very important. And again, technology, so harnessing the right technologies so as to improve productivity, improve efficiency, so that the job becomes a more attractive job for someone looking to enter the industry. I think the other thing to underscore when we're talking about people is mindset. And I think this has been alluded to, but a mindset shift is critical in the built environment sector to go away from working in silos, where everyone is guarding turfs because I don't want to share my IP with you, I don't want to share my profits with you. I think we need to think more broadly and bigger as a community. And this is what's going to be important to foster the exchange of ideas and co-creation amongst industry players. Last, I think profits cannot be avoided. I think healthier margins, definitely in the built environment sector, will be able to encourage greater experimentation and investment in innovation, as well as cooperation amongst industry players. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there could also be more equitable sharing of risks and rewards, an outcome that we could potentially achieve if we use more collaborative contracting. And this requires us to change the processes, change the procedures, the ways of working today as an industry to enable more collaboration. And also, as I talked about when I talked about people, the mindset shift is very important. Mindset shift both of the companies in the industry, but also as an industry as an entirety. Now, one topic that when we meet up often comes up is this concept of hunting as a pack, and how Singapore companies can come together and do better to hunt as a pack. And then, as we mentioned, with a small market and a small market with compressing margins, I think our businesses are all innovatively looking overseas for growth and for growth opportunities. Now, what this means when we say hunting as a pack, well, key partners across the value chain will really need to share financing, contractual, operational risks. But there are a few issues that we'll need to grapple with and be honest with ourselves about. Number one, the SMEs in the consortium, they typically may not have the local knowledge or expertise in the destination market. And then the cost implications of that and or the delivery risk could be too high for the other members of the consortium to stomach. Number two, the established developers, contractors, consultants who have the capability and the capacity to venture overseas on their own will likely question the rationale for bringing others along with them for the ride. And I think the third one is the most important, which is I think the unequal benefits and risks that are undertaken make it very difficult to structure a fair deal for all the parties involved. So I think whilst we talk about hunting as a pack, we really need to think this through because it will not happen organically. And if we do want to succeed in hunting as a pack, I think a lot of thought needs to take place at the industry level to really develop the framework and the structures that will enable us to collectively venture overseas successfully. Okay. Now, I thought it would also be useful at this point in time to touch on some of what other markets have done to drive industry transformation. First, getting that mutual consent on standards across the industry is going to be very important. I think by harmonizing the technical specifications of products and the services, industries can be more efficient and barriers of trade can be broken down. The construction industry as a whole lacks robust global arrangements on standards. I think as a result of that, productivity gains that we've had as an industry from modernization have largely been forfeited to some extent. And we'll continue to see that being forfeited even with digitalization if the industry, as we've talked about, has a very high degree of fragmentation. Alliances and organizations, I think those that represent multiple stakeholders and are varied enough to really truly represent the interests of the sector as a whole have proven to be quite useful, right? Because what they can do is they can act in concert and define key areas to work on and agree on a common perspective. So for example, the German Sustainable Building Council, I'm not even going to attempt to say what that is in German, but the GSBC, which has its own German acronym, has developed certification schemes. And this provides for a uniform basis that can help to evaluate the planning, construction, and operations of sustainable buildings. Down south in Australia, they're also pioneering with a standardization of project alliance agreements so that they can reduce the initial costs involved in establishing these agreements. Now, the second thing that I like to talk about here is facilitating more data exchange, benchmarking, and best practice sharing. Increased knowledge sharing among peers can really help to close the gap between technological development and application. And for this purpose, the industry can establish a platform to encourage more regular sharing of best practices and the benchmarks as well. And what we can do is to make the most of data by really ensuring its availability, comparability, and protection. Now, this is nice to say. Underpinning all of this, I think, as you all know, we may have all these things, but if the mindset isn't there, if people don't want to share and everyone is still guarding their turf, then we can spend a lot of time and effort getting all these platforms in place, but they're going to be white elephants. So overseas, I think people have proven to be a little bit more open. So for example, the Construction Industry Institute in the United States, they've been able to collect best practice insights from the different industry players and make them available to their member companies. The third one that I want to talk about here, the last, is encouraging cross-industry collaboration along the value chain. I think a lot of the speakers and the panelists have talked about it this morning. So better collaboration is needed, not just amongst or within peer companies, but really amongst companies across the value chain. And a good way to encourage this, the cross-country or cross-sector segment collaboration, is through industry-wide initiatives. We can drive joint R&D efforts. We can also drive projects around data generation, management, analysis, and insight generation. And then, of course, grants. And I'm glad to hear from Kelvin's speech earlier, we're expecting more grants coming up. Grants are always helpful. So the way I see it is that platforms need to be established to facilitate knowledge exchange across the value chain and to align the industry on perspectives around what the design, construction, and operational elements are. And in addition to that, we need to have measures in place, measures that can be introduced to enable more independent certification and quality assurance, and thereby accelerate the adoption of the new technologies. Now, an example of a country that has done this well is again, Germany. The German Association for the Construction Industry has established the initiative Planen und Bauen, this one I dare to say, Planen und Bauen 4.0, or Plan and Build 4.0. And this was in 2014. It involved, I think, various industry associations. And the aim was to create a national center of competence. And the initiative has really played a key role in the implementation of BIM, as well as a number of other digital innovations in the German construction industry. Further west, the Canadian Construction Association also did something similar in a different vein, but they set up a Lean Construction Institute in 2015. And this was to provide a platform for really all the supply chain participants in the sector to collaborate on the development and application of lean tools and techniques along the building life cycle. Now, I'd like to talk about some proposed policy incentives. So I'll shift gears here to think about, this was some thought that we put into what could motivate industry players to collaborate better. The first one was potentially providing a framework for the entire life cycle financing, instead of having the developers, contractors, suppliers, all looking for their independent financing solutions. And in so doing, we might be able to reduce the financing risk and costs. Number two, we can consider balancing, encouraging a more self-regulated as well as innovative industry. The government can continue to monitor where we are as a sector and start to think about how to allow more autonomy as well as self-regulation once a certain level of maturity has been attained. Number three, we need to promote collaboration through incentives. Grants, again, are very welcome, as well as an established legal framework. The public sector definitely could lead the way here by, for example, using themselves to be the example, to establish the confidence within the sector about the collaboration framework and encourage more people to come on board to use the collaboration framework. The fourth is to provide incentives to push for a wider adoption of IDD, which we've talked about, and help to eliminate the inefficiencies and uncertainties in project delivery, as well as regulatory approvals. As the IDD is relatively new, we think that it will need a little bit more time to be accepted and adopted by the whole value chain. So again, maybe perhaps HDB and other public sector projects can take the lead to adopt IDD more aggressively, so that this can help us to gain a pathway towards wider adoption. Number fifth, I talked about at the beginning, extending project timelines. Extending project timelines, again, will encourage longer and better upfront design and coordination through the IDD. And then finally, we think that working with higher learning institutions would be useful for SMEs also to kind of upskill the overall talent pool And in so doing, we can encourage more participation as well as promotion of talent to pursue careers in the built environment sector towards building a more sustainable set of business alliances. Now, finally, please indulge me as I use Keppel Lands projects in the Keppel Bay precinct to illustrate how upstream entities at the start of the value chain can facilitate an alliance. What you see here is what we've done over the years in the Keppel Bay precinct. And what we believe we've done is to build a sustainable business alliance between master developers, contractors, designers, and architects. So we are the master developer of the Keppel Bay precinct. We collaborated with Wohab. I see Darong Young in the audience. I know Neil's online as well. In 2007 for Reflections at Keppel Bay. 7 years later, in 2014, again, we collaborated with Wohab for Corals at Keppel Bay. And we're currently working with them again for the Reef at King's Dock. Besides Wohab, we also have long-term agreements with consultants, architects, engineers who were involved right from the start of the precinct development, and that was way back almost 21 years ago now in 2000. As waterfront developments naturally would require a lot more consideration on things like environmental issues, such as the protection of marine biodiversity. It requires really early identification of potential issues and the implementation of solutions to mitigate possible downstream risks. So we engage our consultants and contractors very early on in terms of what areas there are to improve upon and identify, again, the design and construction risks. And close collaboration amongst the various parties that were involved really ensured that the ground risks were well understood and mitigated early on. And it's not just in Singapore alone. So our collaboration with Wohab extended beyond Singapore. We've gone with them to markets like Myanmar, India, as well as Sri Lanka. I think one key advantage to underscore, it is easier to work with like-minded companies, and these could be Singaporean companies or could be other maybe Singaporean companies, but who have been here for a long time and who know us well, to work with them in overseas market. And these are companies who we are confident that can meet our standards for quality, safety, and timely deliveries. So, in conclusion, to close, I think as we cultivate a culture of collaboration across the chain of stakeholders in the built industry through our concerted efforts, I am confident that we will foster the development of a sustainable built environment business ecosystem. And this will help to drive the overall built industry's growth and resilience. I look forward to continued discussions on the opportunity we have here to transform the industry at today's summit and beyond. And thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Lim. Pass me the clicker. You can be seated as well. Thank you, Mr. Lim, for sharing with us very insightful challenges on collaboration. And my phone was actually buzzing with lots of questions from my fellow peers as well. So I guess we are all excited for the next plenary session. So with this stage set and our thoughts on business alliances ignited, I think it is also timely that we have our second plenary session. All right, the theme for this plenary session is the role of leadership in developing the built environment business ecosystem. And this panel is curated to feature the younger generation of leaders across the built environment value chain to provide us with insight and diversity on leadership aspirations for the BE sector. And with representatives from large organizations to local SMEs, we can look forward to hearing their vision for the sector as we chart new frontiers for the BE sector. All right, this session will be moderated by Professor Winston Chow, Associate Professor of Science, Technology and Society, School of Social Sciences, SMU. So may I invite our exciting lineup of panelists from all over large organizations to local SMEs, Mr. Omar Shahzad, Group Chief Executive Officer of Mindheart Group. Yes, Mr. Marcus Lu, Chief Executive Officer at Surveils Singapore. Architect Xia Chi Huang, Chief Executive Officer, DP Architects. And lastly, Mr. Roy Koo, Kimley Construction Private Limited, Director of Kimley Construction Private Limited, on stage to join Mr. Louis Lim for the plenary session. And for the audience in the hall, all right, it's time for you to ask questions. So if you have a question to pose to the panelists, please raise your hands to the usher that's allocated within your zone, all right? And when the moderator opens the session to the floor. So let's observe some basic decorum. Don't forget to identify yourself and the organization which you are from before asking your questions. And for those of you who are online, all right, it's your chance also to ask questions. You can always feel free to use the Q&A button right below your screen to ask and post your questions, okay? So I will now hand over the time to Mr. Louis. Oh, sorry, Professor Chow, sorry. Yes, Mr. Chow, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Good to see everybody here in person, as well as a good morning to everyone online. To start off, Louis, that was a heck of a talk. Very forceful, very powerful. You gave us a lot of things to discuss about. And apart from on stage, Louis, we have 5 young leaders, very emerging leaders here, and we had a very good pre-discussion along the themes that you discussed. I'd like to start off by mentioning a few buzzwords that we talked about, which included barriers, change, innovation, sustainability, technology, manpower, labor, leadership alliances, and the dreaded C word, which I think we'll talk a lot about, and I think we'll get questions from the audience both here and online. Costs. So to start off first, I want to touch on this issue on barriers. And I'd like to invite Omar. Louis talked a lot about the challenges of transformation, but I think there's this issue of barriers that has to be touched upon a little bit more. So in your opinion, what are some of these barriers to stop or to hinder the building of a collaborative ecosystem of stakeholders within this sector for sustainability?
Sure, I'll be delighted to. Thank you very much. Before I get into the barriers, let me sort of set the context. The construction industry is a very established, very mature industry. It's also quite a small industry, and most of the industry players know each other in terms of their capabilities, resources, and reputation. There's also an 80-20 rule in that 20% of projects probably dominate a vast majority of the total construction spending. So rightly so, developers, project owners are very risk averse when they curate the project team involved, because there's a whole lot of scrutiny and there's a lot at stake for such projects. And thirdly, historically, as we have heard from all the speakers so far, there's not been a whole lot of innovation and productivity. In our industry, there's also not been a whole lot of disruption that we've seen in other industries. So unfortunately, price is the major differentiator. So if I now want to talk about the barriers, let me mention 3 or 4 that I think affect our industry the most. The first is the procurement process. Because the industry is relatively small and we all know each other, clients, developers go and shortlist consultants and contractors for very specific roles based on their reputation and capabilities. So the project team is sort of set up by the developer themselves for many projects. So in that type of scenario, the ability to collaborate is quite minimal because the team is set up by the client themselves. This is quite different to other countries where clients are looking at a lead consultant, for example, to put up the design team, or the main contractor to put up all the subcontractors under them. Here we sometimes go for nominated subcontractors. So it's a different ballgame in Singapore to other markets. So that's one reason. The second is, I think the long-term collaboration, the benefits of long-term collaboration sometimes are not easily measurable in cost-driven contracts. And for long-term collaboration to be more useful, I would argue the best way to do that is when you have long-term visibility of projects, long-term framework contracts, in our business as consultants, scaled fees. So if you have that type of environment, then collaboration becomes a more natural thing to do. So, and the third thing is, many of us have had past experiences where alliances haven't worked. Many of us have done MOUs, and I would say maybe 50% of them work, 50% don't. Some say the MOUs are not worth the paper they're written on. So, thank God for digital technology, we don't have to use paper anymore. But, really, why sometimes collaborations don't work, in my view, Professor Chow, I think there are 2 or 3 reasons. One is the lack of perceived benefit. Collaborations take time to develop and cultivate, and sometimes the interest fizzles out because you don't do them for low-hanging fruits, and so over time you sort of forget about it. Secondly, you also feel that you're bogged down to one set of partners and you want to have more flexibility. And thirdly, I think the other reason is in Singapore's context, historically, there's not been a whole lot of push from the government to spur such alliances. Of course, things are changing now, as we have heard from Kelvin and others. But I still think these barriers can be overcome. And a good thing about collaboration is that it doesn't cost anything. There's no upfront cost to it, but you need a whole lot of commitment and trust. So I'll just sort of leave it at here.
Yep, thanks, Omar. That's a very optimistic viewpoint. Can I ask Marcus, do you share that sort of optimism in terms of the barriers that prevent this alliance from happening?
Well, thanks, Professor Chow. My observations are fairly basic. I do agree with what Omar has said earlier. It's all well and good that we have big leading institutional players like CapitaLand, Keppel, Mapletree, have sustainable ambassadors. I feel that there's a huge part of the market where there's a severe lack of such ambassadors pushing at the forefront, taking into consideration government schemes, government incentives, and sharing and engaging with like-minded individuals. It's encouraging to hear leading firms taking the lead, prioritizing sustainability as a #1 issue that we need to tackle. But there's a huge part of the market that is still behind the 8 ball, if I may call it that way. And I think there needs to be a lot of education from schools, tertiary level, where companies can send representatives to improve their understanding of what sustainable really means. If you were to ask any one of you out there, so what does sustainable mean to you? It's very hard for the person to elaborate. So we deal with a lot of property owners, developers, investors, and users. They all have their own respective ESG compliance codes. But if you drill down to the detail in terms of what they're planning to do, a lot of them scratch their heads. They try to, think of something to roll out within their own organization. But I think more needs to be done as far as education, raising awareness. And the elephant in the room, which is cost, which is a huge prohibitive factor for encouraging the sectors to embark on putting in place green infrastructures. The first thing they will ask is, what's my payback period? I've met so many investors, so many property owners that say, look, all well and good, I'm happy to put in place all such stuff, but what's my ROI? Of course, we have to separate this discussion. It's a separate topic altogether, but cost is indeed a prohibitive factor. Let's take, for example, the valuation principles till today is still fairly archaic. You have 2 buildings in core CBD. One's certified as Green Mark Gold Plus. The other is certified as Green Mark Platinum and LEED status. The valuation principles still take into consideration the rental income, the financials that they draw from the asset, net off the outgoings. By purely a differentiation in certification doesn't prescribe a higher value for the LEED status building. So perhaps this is also one barrier or a systemic issue where banks, authorities, professionals like valuers need to come together, get to a common consensus in terms of how buildings should be graded in terms of their certification level. And then perhaps that will spur asset owners to embark on that sustainability journey. So I think these are just some of the barriers that we face, that I see, that I observe. And a lot of evidence has been around on outgoings. We as Savills represent a lot of institutional end users. A lot of them have their own ESG compliance. They want to be in a green building. They want to go to a platinum LEED status building. is a check for them in that box. The last 10 years, there have been a lot of push from BCA and government agencies mandatorily getting developers to certify their buildings. And the sales pitch is to end users is, no, come to my building because my building is very efficient. You'll be able to reduce your outgoings. But the truth of the matter, this has been happening for the last 10 years. The outgoings are still fairly high. So the end user is now turning around and asks, so what's the benefit for me to come to your building when my outgoings hasn't been reduced since the last 10 years? In fact, it's gone up due to inflation and some other factors. So I think these are just some of the barriers that I observe that's preventing this from moving forward.
Yep, thanks, Marcus. That is the biggest elephant in the room. It's getting more visible, and we will touch upon that later in a group, in our panel for group discussion. But before, you touched a lot about change and the need for it, and so did Louis in his talk. And this issue of transformation and innovation, and these are the two other buzzwords which I'm going to invite Chi Huang and also Roy to talk about in their own perspectives in the architecture sector and in the engineering sector. So Chi Huang, what do you think are the sort of, how can BE leaders collectively push for innovation for this particular sector, which, as we know, is rather hesitant in adopting new technologies?
So, morning, ladies and gentlemen, and to the fellow panelists. Before I answer that question on how, perhaps I will start with two whys. So why do we need to innovate in the first place, especially, say, in the space of architectural consultancy? Because primarily it's about competitive advantage when you talk about businesses. We know that one of the matrix fees is not the way to go, because it will just lead us to a kind of miserable end, which unfortunately a part of our sector a large part is suffering. So the idea of innovation is really to allow us to provide that differentiator and creating values, be it for our clients, our consumers, our users. And I also need to qualify that innovation is not just about technology, because in our space, innovation includes things like typology, the kind of different building types, the science that drive the design. It's a huge aspects of space. I think it's important. Programming is also key. But obviously, we also need to recognize that tech plays a key role in enabling things like productivity, but more importantly, how it also allows us to achieve more important outcomes, which I think earlier was touched on, the space of wellness, in the space of sustainability. So this is, I think, quite clear for not just architects, but all the members here in our industry. So then why is this sector hesitant? And today, I'm quite glad the previous speakers and presenters have laid the grounds for it. But just to touch on it, probably three aspects. Culture. Culturally, I think as a sector, we are very pragmatic and quite risk-averse. A part of that is because of the construct. So we touch on the part that the sector is litigious and it's heavily and highly regulated. So in the space of this nature, naturally, you'll be laden with issues of liabilities, contractual obligation. And with that, the resultant sentiments is generally, when you talk about innovation in the space, you will always associate with issue of costs. And then there's lack of resources and this lack of capabilities. But more importantly, I think conditions precedent to innovation is always about experimentation. And this is one part that I think the current build-up of our environment and space is not conducive to move towards that, because many of the members don't see the tangible value in return through innovation. I think that's one of the probably major hurdle, as what was also touched on. And I think when you have this challenge of a limited capacity, not just in the professional role, but also the psychological aspects, it becomes difficult to get members to join you to take that first step. So how do we tackle issues of that? to change that behavior. I think, first of all, what's interesting and very relevant to all of us is we are all members of built environment. You know, Singapore has the success story, 50 years, we create a city out of nothing. So now it's our best challenge that we can redesign this entire environment that we operate in. So because we have the developers here, the consultants, operators, we have the builders and the regulators and facilitators. So it's really about designing this environment that's conducive for us to take that step towards innovation. So with that, I think key part is a new matrix altogether. So beyond dollars and cents, beyond the discussion of per square foot, the kind of value, I think when we start to have matrix that talks about kilowatt per hour, carbon footprint, and then when we can tag a value of not just the cost of doing that, but the more important thing is the cost of not doing that. What is the outcome? I think that will immediately change the way we discuss. And of course, with that mechanism, like what Luis touched on earlier and Omar touched on, is how it also drives the reinvention of procurement framework. With that procurement framework, Luis touched on larger policy that drives that. And one solution is sandboxes. Because I think it's important that we test bed ideas and different micro environments with different project types. I'm a true believer that you need to design an outcome in mind. Say that if now with all the stakeholders here, there is a project, we say that there's this project, but to do this, all of you need to fulfill, whether it's footprint, whether it's measure of manpower, etc. All of us, because there is a job in mind, we will naturally gravitate towards that. So earlier, I think Kevin touched on 300 firms that we are trying to engage. Maybe we design 30 jobs with 30 sandboxes, with all these different kind of new condition or alternative condition in mind, different legal framework, terms of references. Because this 30 job will definitely, in each job, touch on more than 10 firms in Singapore or different firms. And I think that is one of the ways that we can potentially really shift that behavior and perhaps even larger structural change.
That's a very forceful answer, and I'm glad you talked a bit about that paradigm shift, because in SMU, I teach a course on urban sustainability, and all my students also point out the need to think differently, to go beyond dollars and cents and to point out the issues of carbon emissions, embedded carbon. I mean, we as users of the new connection building, which is developed by mass engineered timber, and we live, work and play and study in low engineered, super low energy buildings, we experience that and we see the value of that innovation in that process. Over to you, Roy. Do you see that sort of similar challenges or shifts in paradigm from your experiences?
So I'll speak from a builder's point of view. I think with this pandemic crisis, and the labor crunch, we have a lot of talk about technology to solve this labor issue. But we do have some challenges. First of all, is the technology ready and available, and even is it feasible for us to use? If we could have robots to build our buildings right now, I'll be very happy to buy them, because I cannot get any workers to come in, right? But it is not available, right? But in the future, it may be ready for us, but that would be years down the road. And regarding building methods and technologies, the biggest problem for us is the price and the cost. Compared to the current methods that we have, the labor-intensive methods that we have, new technology commands quite a fair bit of premium. And if I were to go and bid for a contract with this price, I will never get it. I'll be out of work, right? To be fair, the developers also most developers will not want to pay unnecessary costs or additional costs in order to reach a result that can be achieved with a cheaper method. So this is one of the big problems we have. But right now, with the labor costs rising, we may see the price difference between, say, PPVC and normal cast and steel concrete. The price gap will close, and we can see more people moving towards the PPVC construction. Another challenge we have is the apprehension from either the building owners or the asset owners, and to some extent the authorities, right? We like to stick with what works. So concrete has served us well for many decades. Why change that? Why use steel? Why use timber? Why try something different and risk issue down the road? Whether is it with the building maintenance or even approvals from the authorities. From our own experience, we have faced quite a fair bit of challenges when we bring in new materials in. I think you mentioned your school was built with timber, right? That one, we also do timber buildings, and we also face a very steep mountain to climb when we want to get approvals done, right? So on that part, the building owners may not want to do it. The builders will say, why spend extra effort? Why bother, right? But having said that, I think what was mentioned earlier in one of the speeches was we need to be future ready. And I think the government, especially the GPs, will play a role in being a catalyst for builders to try new technologies or to adopt new technologies, to be future ready. It's inevitable that labor costs will go up. Sooner or later, nobody from India or less people from India, Bangladesh or China will want to come to Singapore to work because obviously they're developing. Labor crunch will come sooner or later, but we need to get ready for that. We cannot wait till the time has come and then goes, oh, okay, let's change. So I think the GPs will be the one to push for this. I think there are a lot of very progressive ones there. There are also quite progressive private developers, right? I'm not saying to underwrite the cost of all this technology, but to at least help and be a springboard. So once it's proven it can work, more people adopt it. And I think there's a lot of talk for alliance. I think if we can get the builders, the consultants, and the developers together early to push for innovation together, that will help with innovation adoption. Also, I would like to say that there's a lot of good technology in Singapore, locally developed technologies by the IHLs, the universities, by consultants, engineering consultants, by architects, also by local builders. If you look around, you will find some. And I think that if these can be pushed and adopted in the local scene, then it will also be proof of, it'll be a proof of concept, or at least that it's proof to other people overseas that this technology can work, and that can be exported also.
Okay, thanks, Roy. So from the discussion so far, I think there's fertile ground. The seeds are there for a good business alliance to deal with sustainability in the future. But again, the whole underlying discussion is underpinned on costs, that C word. Before I ask you, Louis, to respond to that, just a quick update. If there are questions online, please feel free to write them and submit them. We'll try and we'll have some time to answer your questions, as well as for the audience here. There are microphones by the side of the stage. It's a bit difficult to see if you have questions. After we finish the next set of discussion on costs, I would like to invite the audience here to ask questions if you want to do so, okay? So Omar has talked a bit about looking at the long term for costs and how that is arguably more important rather than the short term, the short term in this aspect. Marcus has talked, the elephant in the room, the importance of ROI in terms of costs. Both Chi Huang and Roy have mentioned that some changes have to be made in terms of a new paradigm, a new matrix to assess costs, and leveraging how the current COVID situation has impeded or increase the costs basically in this sector. So I'm asking you, Louis, what are your views on this as a potential hindrance or something to consider to help advance the agenda of a sustainable business alliance?
I think very evidently the economics that underpin how we work as an industry and how we embrace new technology is quite evident. I think as an industry, we're very cost conscious in general. But that said, I do think that the time has changed. Not a few years ago where the cost seemed to be prohibitive. We were talking about payback periods of maybe 8 to 12 years. Right now we're talking maybe 4 to 5 years. And in the way that we've seen it in the renewables world, where with a fast decreasing costs of like PV panels, right, versus traditional fossil fuels, there are companies who are pivoting very quickly, as we are as Keppel Group, towards renewables. So I do see that this will have an impact on how quickly technologies are taken up. But the other thing is, although we are cost conscious, I think as an industry, there are significant cost inefficiencies across the value chain. And a lot of that is also because we don't work as effectively together across the value chain. And I think one of the opportunities that we need to think about as we think about where Singapore could be is where we kind of find those sources of value to undo the things that we've done before so that we can invest in the technologies of the future to make us a digital, future-ready built environment sector. The one thing that we haven't quite talked about, which is not quite related to economics, but I think is important to have a point of view on, is the fact that actually choosing the technologies is not so easy. Right? You say, I want to use this new platform, or I want to use this new energy efficient tech. Which one? Right? And then you'll always end up negotiating with yourself to figure out who is the best person. You're trying to try it on different buildings, and then it takes time. And 6 months later, you're still saying, hey, is this one better or is that one better? So that I think is one of the practical challenges that we need to address as well, whether as an industry we can form more of a forward-thinking group where we can have more tech foresight and support to help us identify for different types of technologies who are the 3 to 5 go-to vendors that we want to select. Just a thought.
Interesting there, but let me challenge you a bit on that. But that speaks to how risk-averse different sectors will deal with taking that new technologies and experimenting them to see how their bottom line is affected, right? So maybe I would throw this question onto the 4 panelists here. How would you like to respond to that issue of the issue that Louis has raised? Marcus, please.
I think what Louis said is absolutely correct. We have met many customers who wish to embark on this sustainability journey, but they don't know where to begin. Before you want to know where you want to go, right, we have to find out where they are at as far as carbon footprint is concerned. And a lot of them are apprehensive because the technology is moving so fast. They are concerned that the investment that they put in will be obsolete in 4 years' time. So that's also keeping a lot of asset owners who wish to do it but sitting on the fence. And the other point, and we spoke earlier with Chi Huang at a session amongst ourselves, and he raised another good point where at the ministry level, to build something, you need to go through 6 or 7 agencies. And maybe that's a way that is discouraging, or that form of process is discouraging a lot of the lesser, smaller size firms or the SMEs to go about undertaking that sustainability change. If there is a way to streamline that process, perhaps it can be a bit more efficient and more productive, then it will encourage a lot more asset owners to come out of the shell and start embarking and learn from the big boys like CDL or Keppel or CapitaLand, who's taking the lead right now. So I think there's a few issues that everything needs to integrate, not just one issue.
Okay. Chi Huang, I'm going to put you on the spot. Since you had a thought there, I'm going to quiz you on this. Do you agree with what Marcus has said?
I think on the part about encouraging that shifts, we know that it's an issue of alignment, especially in an environment that is so complex with so many different stakeholders and partners. I think just linking what Louis and Marcus have shared, and earlier something that was also touched on, it's about also establishing commonalities in terms of standards, in terms of targets, in terms of interests. All right, and because we have to understand that in a setup of this nature, even all the panelists here, amongst the six of us, we have very different immediate goals within our own, whether it's business, sector, or profession. So the very important thing is how do we come together to establish a common and aligned goals. And it is not just about the private participation, There's a very important aspects of public participation. Just to share the numbers that Marcus shared, I was telling this story that we did this check. It was with SIA, Singapore Institute of Architects, earlier. Say a typical life of an architect. So if even for a house, you need to traverse across 6 ministries minimally, and at least 9 to 10 agencies. So you know that the regulatory bodies and agencies are actually core partners in terms of this larger common goals and alignment. And it's important, you see, in this platform, I mean, we see a few key chiefs and reps from this agency. And in fact, we need a lot more dialogue with many of these agencies in the same forum. So at least we can come to an understanding the evolution of the regulatory environment, the bodies, their concerns, anxieties, so that we can work towards not just an alliance that push for innovation, but it's one that still ensure that our built environment is safe, is livable and secure for the long-term future.
That's a very good point, especially on the need for communication. It touches upon something that was said earlier, that innovation sometimes is too focused on technology, but sometimes the simplest innovation is just talking to each other, making sure everyone's on the same page. And on that note, I've noticed that there are several questions that have been asked from the online audience. I'm just checking to see if there are questions or anybody standing by the side. Not yet. There's one that actually, our previous discussion segues very nicely into the question. It was a question on regulations, I guess. So if that can be brought up. No, yes, this one. So this is question asked online. Industry transformation should be a metamorphosis. What are the views of the panelists on deregulation, such as getting rid of supervision and for members to self-regulate and shape the industry with fellow professionals to achieve better outcomes? So again, that communication issue, talking to different stakeholders, cutting across different silos. Omar, can I ask you on your thoughts on whether, on answering this question on metamorphosis?
Sure. Happy to do so. I just wanted to add a point that Louis said, and I represent Meinhardt, and we're an engineering consultancy firm. So we are quite upstream in the process after the client sort of sets up a project and appoints us. And in most of the kickoff meetings that I've attended, clients often talk about the big mega trends: digitalization, DFMA, smart cities or smart buildings. And a consultant can play a very important role to evaluate different technologies, the cost impact. But really, I think this is the point where you need a whole of industry approach, because the vantage point of a consultant may not be complete 100%. That's where you need to bring in the technology providers, the contractors. So this is where we need to break out of our silo thinking and collaborate more extensively, even at that early stage, because at the end of the day, the project has to be built. The project needs to be fitted in with technology. So the earlier we can bring all the different stakeholders, I think the better it would be, and the better outcome we will have. Now, talking about the online question, my views are, in Singapore, we are quite blessed that we have a very proactive BCA, URA, government agencies are quite responsive. As Manohar said, we are already one of the best in the world. So my view is that deregulation perhaps is not a good thing, because by having a set of regulations, it keeps everyone in check. You know what is expected of you. Of course, regulations can be fine-tuned, can be streamlined, the processing time can be quicker, and certain things don't have to go in sequence. They can be done, simultaneously. So my view is that compared to many other countries that don't even have standards, not even British standards or American standards, Singapore, at least we have a common platform, a baseline, and I think we should continue doing that, but we can always see how we can streamline processing time for permits and approvals. That's my view.
Okay. Fellow panelists, you want to follow up on that discussion?
Yeah, okay. So it's quite funny. I was asking Roy, hey, do you want to share on this? Say, hey, your QP, you should touch on this. Because it was quite funny when we touched on the issue of regulatory liabilities and responsibility. Earlier, I think was Capital Land Manohar, who touched on, say, hey, consultants, you're our father. Developers are mother, and I think was it builders were children or something. And then you say, father, just do this, and then left. But I was just sharing with the rest. I said, hey, but this father, if the police call, the first person they throw in jail is the father. So at best, the mother and kids will just visit the father behind bars. Because this is the part that it's important that we understand what is the purpose of regulation. All right, and I think this is a success story of Singapore, that something that has allowed us to bring to this stage. Obviously, the landscape of development, the challenges are increasingly complex. The idea, as I said, it's really through more discussion and dialogue, not so much about deregularizing things, but how do we evolve our regulatory framework. I thought Connect X will be a game changer. It's major because it allows you to really understand how we are all a part of this entire ecosystem in order to make, say, in a smaller scale, a project successful. Because it's not just about developers, builders, consultants coming in, and of course with operators and assets managers. But the idea is with the collaboration from regulators, we can either fast track the project or see how we can also refine it to hit larger targets. So the key conversation here is really how do we further evolve our regulatory framework so that we are agile and nimble as entire sector.
Thanks for that, Chi Huang.
One other thing, very important.
Please.
As an architect and consultants, for my fellow engineers, we need to speak up about this. Important part is also liabilities tagged to this regulation. Because this is one part that I really feel our sector has undervalued. It's quite crazy for engineers. I think Omar and his colleagues will know that, our liabilities with a project will only discharge in two scenarios, where the building gets demolished or you physically get demolished under the ground. So the kind of the burden that is carried is major. But if the whole idea of, in terms of recognizing the load of these liabilities and the value tagged to it is not clearly defined, this is a space that is getting quite dangerous. Because actually, when you look at it, the penalty for non-compliance has actually gone up. In some cases, it's quadrupled. But the fees and the environment has actually, unfortunately, gone in the reverse cycle. And this adds tremendous pressure, not just for consultants, with developers and with builder partners, into a space that is pretty challenging. And again, through conversation and discussion about common goals and interests is key in order for us to move forward and looking at further future roads.
That's a very good intervention. Thanks for bringing that up, Chi Huang. Roy, there was a question specifically directed to you, but before I ask you on that, I'm going to ask Marcus to follow up on that discussion on liability. Do you think what Chi Huang said is extremely relevant, or do you agree with him?
Yes, I totally agree with what Chi Huang said. I think liabilities carries a lot of risks, and the market must learn a way to provide the right sort of financial compensation. And I have also witnessed the professional fees have been marginalized, going downwards. I suppose it's not in line with the risk that these guys are carrying. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, on to you, Roy. There was a question. Firstly, do you want to add on to what Marcus and Chi Huang has said about liabilities before you answer this specific question for you?
Yeah. So there have been a lot of talks among the builders regarding this supervision of works and very heavy regulation. We're not talking about deregulation, removal of regulations, but how to have a bit more self-regulation in the industry. I think we have to look at overseas market and countries where I don't think many other countries have the RE and RTO system in place. So maybe we have to look at that to take some lead from them. I think the pain point of this regulations or supervision is very time consuming. It is also very manpower consuming. Maybe we can look at, since we're talking innovation, technology innovation to help speed up and make this supervision or even checking more productive. Recently, we had a project that had a trial of TOP, what they call a virtual TOP. This was done with JTC. We used LiDAR and photogrammetry to actually scan the whole building, and the TOP was done from an office indoors. So we had the floor plan, we had the BIM, we had the as-built models, we had the LiDAR model, we had the photogramming, and we even had people to go down and, in case for certain specific, they could take photos and respond straight away. And I think it was much faster and easier. And I think they're looking to further develop that system so that TOP will be, whatever problems we have with TOP will be addressed earlier, so we don't drag the TOP set unnecessarily.
Okay. Was there an answer to answer this question?
No.
Okay. There was a question online from Tan Moa Shao. It's how has Kim Lee Construction implemented digitization in their project workflow to enhance productivity? So far, how was the labor shortage managed, and how did Kim Lee stand by to be quote-unquote future-ready? So that mentioned the TOP example that you gave earlier sort of answered to that, but
yes,
would you like to answer the second and third parts to this question that was asked?
The labor shortage, actually, we see that the projects where we implemented more DFMA have less issues right now. Actually, the project that we have that's using PVBC is actually moving much quicker than the one that's just using standard precast, right? So you can actually see how DFMA has helped with this labor shortage. And how do we stand by to be future ready? We are always looking out for technology, whether it's construction technology or even software to improve productivity. So project management software, even payment software. We're actually looking at payments also. And we're also looking at some automation. We're studying into this. I would say automation is still a bit in its infancy for construction, but if you don't look now, you'll be lag behind. So we have to start looking at this one.
Yep. Not risk averse, taking a chance on innovation and technology to be future ready, quote unquote. Okay, there was one question on empowering. Okay, let's take this question from Han Qiangle, who asks for the panel, what about empowering associations for regulation and gathering statistics on industry costs and perform normalized cost benchmarks? Do you feel that there is a lack of involvement from the various associations where representation should have more representatives from the industry? Interesting question there again on associated with regulation and with industry costs. Louis, are you comfortable with answering that question?
I mean, I think I mentioned it before, right? I think in terms of benchmarking data and getting that together and being able to share it, I think it's something that industry players individually would not typically do. Right? You spend lots of money on a consulting project to kind of gather that kind of information. So it's not something you do regularly, but there would be huge benefits to the industry as well as the ability to encourage change in the industry if people had much better visibility of how they're stacking up against other people and other people who are way ahead of the curve. So I do think that this is something that we should be looking at potential associations, if not regulatory bodies, to take on board that would benefit the industry and sector as a whole.
Okay. Omar, do you agree with what Louis has said?
No, I agree. In fact, I mean, I know in the US, the Contractors Association and the Engineering Association do have access to quite a bit of data amongst the 200 or 300 leading engineering companies, design companies, and contractors. And in Singapore, whilst we have pretty good benchmarks about construction cost, we don't necessarily have great data on, how companies performed, profitability, revenues. Those type of markers is still very tightly held. And it's not just tightly held amongst industry players. I think even sometimes within companies, we don't keep a track of how did the company perform and did we make money or lose money on one project, and how that affects your attitude when you bid for something similar in future and the learnings from that. So I do think there is merit to try and get the industry associations to plug in, and even for companies ourselves to take a look at this data. Nowadays, tools are available where you can easily pull this information up.
Thanks, Omar. There have been several questions asked online, and once again, I would like to check if the on-site audience have any questions. Please wave your hand so that it's quite glaring on stage, so that we can see you, and you can just move to the wings, and then we can try and answer your questions as and when you are ready to ask them. So moving on, there was a question from Ms. Lina Ali, which I think Marcus, the question is, it's for the panel, but the question is, as the next generation of leaders, what are the steps or assistance would you see needed to attract the next generation of Singaporeans into the built environment industries? So, Marcus, over to you.
It's thanks, Professor Shah. It's encouraging to be at a stage or a generation where we see this massive movement on tackling sustainability issues. I think we owe it to the next generation, my kids, your kids, that we need to leave behind a better world than we started with. So I think education at the grassroots level is of utmost importance. Yes, there have been a lot of examples going around currently, but I think more can be done. Like some of the other senior leaders have said before, I think we're doing fine, but a lot more can be done in hammering home the core issues of climate change. And if that can be a daily discussion, and programs at tertiary level, at diploma levels are being set out so that more people are keen to participate. And I get the sense that I'm comforted to know that the Generation Z, moving forward, they're all very concerned about the climate, about the state of the planet Earth. And if it is done correctly with the right programs, with the right mindset, it's a mindset shift, right, like what Louis said earlier, then that is a huge step to achieving what we want to achieve in terms of our goals.
Indeed. That sense of urgency, as you said, is a big push for us. We like to think we're young, but we're not that young. And it's a good driver and a good spur to get us, get our act together. And in the field of climate change, 2030 is an important date, so it's 2050. And before you know it, 9 years is up, and then we have to look back and see what have we done or what should have been done in that time period, exactly.
Can you imagine if it's the children that's teaching the adults what to do? Then the adults have no choice but to follow suit, right?
Indeed.
So I think children plays an important part in the whole process, and we have to look at them. And sometimes, we can let children take the lead, and the adults will have to follow suit. So I think education right at the grassroots level is critical to success.
Thanks, Marcus. Following on from that, this sense of urgency, I'll ask each and every one of you to answer that question that Lina asked, but Chi Huang, do you share that sense of urgency in your field, in the architectural sector, that the driver to push for leadership is from the younger generation?
I agree completely with Marcus. Education plays a huge role in driving or accelerating some of this change. And just further emphasizing on the point, and this is also shared with many of our IHL partners. In fact, a lot of this discussion of, be it about innovation, which I'm very glad in schools is the one that's always leading the forefront, but the importance concept of alliance actually needs to start from school. Because currently, based on our structure, architects still go through the channel, engineers, School of Engineering, and of course, all our different partners in different fields. It's important that we establish that common platform of alliance way ahead during the school environment, because that's one of the safest environment to experiment and innovate. Because from there, collectively, you will learn about success and failure as a team. So, because if not, after the entire system, you roll out architects, engineers, and you come to a meeting room, say, all right, guys, collaborate. You will be like, what? I mean, I'm supposed to be an architect, I'm playing this role. So maybe one of the successful outcomes is the next meeting when we are here, nobody can tell who's the architects in the room, who's the engineers, who's the builders, who's the developers. That perhaps is the way that we can continue to educate. So that's one in terms of format of collaboration. And I want to reinforce the point that Marcus shared about the urgency in driving. As I shared, it's not just about the cost of making, it's the cost of not reinventing the way we make. An expense is issue of topics and subjects like climate change, because it's existential. And one of the other key aspects is also in the space of wellness. Because as an architect, I'm quite excited. What COVID did is it made space popular again. Space in the discussion in the past is always about optimization per square foot, but now you bring a dimension of health. You bring the dimension of performance of individual. Then it becomes, again, not just about a commodity. It's a larger system that shapes not just your behavior, your well-being, and even potentially the future. So this message is key. But my third point that's important, besides collaboration and about this core emphasis on the bigger goals, is going back to education, not just for the young, but for all of us. And in fact, I always share this story. I don't know the definition of young here. I don't really feel so after you're in this sector for a while. So I always say I'm 46, and if our retirement age hits 70, I have 24 years of runway. It is so important that myself, my colleagues, and all our generation continue to get educated. Because if not, we are the largest weakling and hindrance for the next generation to push for change. Because we cannot accept and appreciate some of this change that is very important. And I love it when Marcus said, when you get the children to teach you what's actually important in life, the larger importance. So this equal emphasis of not just for PET, which I know our industry is also emphasizing, but I think a lot more can be discussed and in a more concerted way of the continuous education and training. Because if not, there will be generations of many of our players that will slowly but surely be irrelevant, but they are still stuck in the sector of that space. And that change and this urgency to address some of this very important change will be incremental and not as fast as we hope.
Thanks, Chi Huang. So the next time we hold this, will be replaced by much younger people, and that's something I'll look forward to.
We are young, there's younger.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Roy, you've talked a lot about innovations in technology and how important it is in the engineering side of things. But if you were to tell engineering schools, if you were to tell people in my industry, what would you push for the next set of future leaders in your field? I'm taking notes, so please.
I think I agree with what he said. There needs to be this alliance, there needs to be a breakdown between the engineering, the architectural, and even the builder side, right? So that they all can work together. Because it's true, when you come and work in this environment, you realize that everyone's working in separate compartments. There's no alliance, there's no collaboration, right? And that also affects our productivity and efficiency. I think one of the biggest complaints that we get in our industry is that the working hours are long, right? Yes, improved somewhat. From what I heard, 30 years ago, it used to be a 7-day-a-week affair, and you only have Chinese New Year and Labor Day off. Right?
It's still long, just less job.
Yeah, right. But now it's compared to other industries, we do work very long hours, right? So we do lose a lot of engineering students. They don't go to, some will go to consultants, they'll go to developers. A lot of them join insurance and banking after that, or selling real estate. So if we can be more productive, have better working environment, better working hours, I think we can attract more people to join. Yeah. And we desperately need local people.
Thanks, Roy.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, Omar, what advice would you give? What Marcus, Chi Huang, and Roy have said so far, it resonates with me as an educator. Do you agree with what they say, and do you have other advice to give to the future leaders in our field?
I'll say a few points. First, this issue about not being able to attract youngsters to join our industry is not just a problem unique to Singapore. It's a problem, it's a global problem. I remember reading a statistic a few years ago that there was a poll done on 18 to 24-year-old students, college students in the US. Only 3% of them actually wanted to consider going into the built environment industry. So it's a global issue. And for all the reasons we talked about, personal liability, in fact, I would say it's the only profession I know where engineers take personal liability. Even doctors, to be honest, don't take that sort of risk and liability. Companies obviously do, but also the qualifying of professional engineers. So, I mean, there are some systematic challenges that we need to address as an industry. But I think the way I would say I'd sell our industry to incoming graduates is that this industry, is a big industry. Globally, it's worth $10 trillion. It's 13% of the world GDP. So it's an industry which is solid, it's not small, and it's not going anywhere. The second thing is this industry, I think, is at the cusp of transformation in terms of digital, sustainability, DFMA, and all that sort of stuff. And we're just at the starting. So anyone who's coming in to the real world or to the workforce, you've got a long runway potentially to get involved in some of these exciting transformations. And thirdly, I don't think this industry is only looking for engineers and architects. I think it's looking for people with different skill sets. And above all, we're looking for people who are leaders. And that's not something that's taught exclusively in engineering schools. Everybody's welcome, everybody has value to add.
Thanks, Omar. Finally, to Louis. If you go back in time and you speak to your 24-year-old self, what lessons have you learned, and what could you advise him to be the future leader, or his or her peers, or your peers at that age, to be a future leader in this sector?
Wow. Okay.
Very ambitious question.
That's a slightly loaded question. Well, I was actually more thinking about the context of the people of today, the generation of today, and what they would get out of joining the sector. I think when I was 24, it's a long time ago. I think it would not be so relevant anymore. So I do think that if you know the youths of today, and I think we try as an organization to understand that better. Purpose is incredibly important. I think this is something that we've touched on as a panel. So for example, at Keppel Land, we have redefined our vision to be a leader in redefining urban spaces for a sustainable future. I think these are things that resonate with the youth of today. So I do think that making sure that they see being part of this built sector as a contribution to the world at large is an important one. I think the second one is, and even me back then, but joining a environment or a built sector that has strong people, right? People that they inspire them, that they can learn from, and they feel that they're going to progress in life. And the third one is what we talked about, maybe P for pay, right? Maybe pay by the hour as well, where the remuneration is attractive enough to draw them into the sector.
Okay, thanks, Louis. Right, we've come to more or less to the end of our discussion. I noticed we've run a bit over time for this conference, and I want to keep track of that. But I think we've had a great panel discussion on what it means to be future leaders, the challenges for sustainable business alliance here, how we can innovate, how we can transform. And I think I'm lucky to listen to the five of you talk about this, and I think the audience here also are fortunate to listen to the views that you have expressed towards this particular end. So once again, could I invite the audience to thank our panelists on stage today for a wonderful discussion. And yes, this concludes our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chow, as well as the panel members, for the in-depth discussion of building a sustainable EB ecosystem. And I particularly enjoyed this session, really. I really loved the discussions. All right, and I hope with that, all of us are inspired and looking forward to contributing collectively in synergy towards a stronger built environment sector. Right, I guess you guys can put on your masks. You can have the mask boxes as well. Right. Thank you. And this brings us to the end of our inaugural BuildSG Lead Summit 2021. On behalf of BCA, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers and panelists for being here with us today. To our online participants, after exiting this webinar, you will be directed to access a feedback form for today's session. And I think today we have a very nice engagement with our online questions, but unfortunately, probably our on-site audience is a little bit shy. Maybe we are too used to asking questions online. All right, that's all for today. My name is Colin, and it is my pleasure to be your MC today. Have a pleasant week ahead, and I hope I will see you next year. Thank you.